inclined to stoutness. Their wing muscles were weak and flabby, and with their greater weight of body they flew very badly. Suppose Dao should come over, I suggested to Mila. Don't believe he will, but if he should, how could we stop him? By water he would come, she answered. In boats, small they are, I think, those he has. We could not stop him, for the light ray he would bring. But our women, flying over the ocean, would see him coming, and tell our king. More we could not do now. You mean this patrol would give the government the warning it won't obtain for itself? There would be war then? The people would arm to resist invasion? Mila smiled sadly. There would be war, Alan. But our government, our people, do not look for it. They are like the Peter bird, that hides its head under its wing when it is threatened. The time of sleep was now nearly over, and we thought it best that the girls should fly back at once, so that their arrival at the city would cause as little comment as possible. Mercer and I seated ourselves on the platform as before. The 20 girls grasped its handles, raising it until they were all upon their feet. Then, at a signal, we left the ground. The trip back seemed shorter than coming up. The girls all left the valley together, flying up helter-skelter, and circling about us as we flew steadily onward. Near the great city the girls spread out, so as to approach it from different directions and thus attract less attention, although the time of sleep was not yet over and we knew that few would be stirring about the city. When we reached home we greeted Lua, and dismissed the girls, arranging that they were to come back again that evening, 50 of them this time, to carry the larger platform we were to build. We then had breakfast, and after telling Lua the result of the meeting, at which she was greatly pleased, we went immediately to bed, for we were worn out. It was about noon, I suppose, when we awoke. Mercer and I spent the afternoon building the platform on which to carry Dao's men, a framework with 50 handles instead of 20. Mila and Anina disappeared for the whole afternoon. I did not know what they were doing at the time. Later I found out Anina was devoting it to learning English. During the evening meal we planned it all. Dao's men were living in a house near the edge of the city, the house Dao had occupied before he was banished to the Twilight Country. It had no other occupants at this time. We had learned where they kept their boats in one of the bayous nearby, and in it we intended to take them to the sea, where we would meet the girls, who would then fly with them to the Twilight Country. But we could not figure out how to capture them without alarming the city. We were sure they were unarmed. They had been carefully searched by the authorities when they entered the country. But they were 10 to our 2. Mercer voiced the problem most emphatically. 10 men in a house, he declared. Maybe we can catch them all asleep. But even if they are, how are we going to get them out? There'd be a row, and we don't want any noise. Besides, there's always this confounded daylight here. If we tied them up, somebody might see us when we got outside. How do we get them out of that house without any npus, and down to that boat? That's what I don't see, said Anina suddenly. She had spoken in English, and we looked at her in amazement. She lisped the words in her soft, sweet voice, haltingly, like a little child. Then she turned to Mila and poured out a torrent of her native language. Mercer stared at her in undisguised admiration. As Mila explained it, Alina proposed that she go into Dao's house alone, and decoy his men down to the boat where we could capture them. But how will she get them there? I exclaimed. What will she tell them? She says she can make them think she is one of those few of our women who sympathize with their cause, Mila explained. And she will say that the Earthman who escaped from them she has seen lurking about their boat, perhaps he plans to steal it. She will go there with them, and they can recapture him. They might not all go, said Mercer. We want to get them all. It is Alina's thought that they will all go, for they fear this Earthman much, and all would go to make sure of him. I could not feel it was right for us to let Alina do so daring a thing, and Mercer agreed with me heartily. But Anina insisted, with a fire in her eyes and flushed cheeks that contrasted strangely with her usually gentle demeanour. In the end Mercer and I gave in, for we could think of no better plan, and Mila was confident Anina would not be harmed. It was about what would correspond with 10 o'clock in the evening on Earth when the girls began to arrive. We waited until all 50 of them had come in. Mila named a place on the shore of the sea known to them all. They were to take the platform, starting in about 2 hours, when the city would be quiet, and there they would wait for us to join them in the boat. We 4 started out together, but soon Anina left us to make her way to Dow's house alone. Mercer, Mila and I then hurried as fast as we could through the city down to the marshlands, and to the secluded spot on the bayou's bank where the boat was lying. The bayou here was about 100 feet wide, a winding, brackish stream, lined on both sides with trees whose roots were in the water and whose branches at times nearly met overhead. Its banks were a tangled mass of tree roots, huge ferns, palmettos and some tall upstanding kind of water grass. Half-submerged logs jutted out into the sluggish current, making it in places seem almost impassable. A narrow metal boat, a very long and very narrow motor boat with a thatched shelter like a small cabin over part of its length, lay fastened to a tree near at hand. I noticed at once some mechanism over its stem. We had come up quietly to make sure no one was about. Now we hid ourselves close to the boat and waited with apprehension in our hearts for the arrival of Anina with Dow's men. Half an hour, perhaps, went by. The silence in this secluded spot hung heavy about us. A fish broke the glassy surface of the water, a lizard scurried along the ground, a bird flitted past. Then, setting our hearts pounding, came the soft snapping of underbrush that we knew was the cautious tread of someone approaching. I was half reclining under a fallen tree, with a clump of palmettos about me. I parted their fronds carefully before my face. A few yards away a man was standing motionless, staring past me and apparently listening intently. He moved forward after a moment. I feared he was coming almost upon us, but he turned aside, bending low down as he crept slowly forward. Sounds in the underbrush reached me now from other directions, and I knew that the men had spread apart and were stalking the boat, expecting Mercer to be in or near it. Had they all come down here? I wondered. And where was Alina? I looked down at Mila warningly as I felt her move slightly. "We'll wait till they are all near the boat," I whispered to Mercer. I saw Anina a moment later soaring over the bayou just above the tree tops. I sighed with relief, for it was a signal to us that everything was all right. We continued to wait until the men had all come into view. They went at the boat with a sudden rush. Several of them climbed into it, with shouts to the others. With a significant glance to Mercer, I leaped suddenly to my feet. I was perhaps 20 feet from the boat, and the space between us was fairly clear. A single bound landed me beside it, almost among 4 of the men who were standing there in a group. Before they had time to face me, I was upon them. I scattered them like 9 pins, and 2 of them went down under my blows. The other 2 flung themselves upon me. I stumbled over some inequality of the ground, and we all 3 fell prone. This was the first time I had come actually to hand grips with any of the Mercutians. I felt now not only their lack of strength, but a curious frailness about their bodies, a seeming absence of solidity that their stocky appearance belied. These 2 men were like half-grown boys in my hands. I was back on my feet in a moment, leaving one of them lying motionless. The other rose to his knees, his face white with pain and terror. I left him there and looked about me. Mila was fluttering around nearby, as I had instanted her, just off the ground and with the whole scene under her eyes. It was she on whom I depended for warning should any of the quarry attempt to escape us. At the edge of the water another man was lying, whom I assumed Mercer had felled. There was a great commotion from the boat. I ran toward it. A man was standing beside it, an old man with snow-white hair. He stood still, seeming confused and in doubt what to do. As I neared him, he turned clumsily to avoid me. I passed him by and bounded over the boat's gunwale, landing in its bottom. The first thing I saw was Mercer struggling to his feet with 4 of the Mercutians hanging on him. One had a grip on his throat from behind, another clutched him about the knees. The 2 others let go of him when they heard me land in the boat. One had evidently had enough, for he dived overboard. The other waited warily for my onslaught. As I got within reach, I hit at his face, but my blow went wild. He hit me full in the chest, but it was the blow of a child. At that instant I heard Mercer give a choking cry, and out of the corner of my eye saw him go down again. I could waste no more time upon this single antagonist. The man had his hands at my throat now. I seized him about the waist and carried him to the gunwale. He clung to me as a rat might cling to a terrier, but I shook him off and dumped him in the water. I turned to Mercer just as he was struggling to his feet again, and in a moment more between us we had felled his 2 assailants. Mercer's face was very white, and I saw blood streaming from a wound on his head, but he grinned as he faced me. "Have we got 'em all?" he gasped. He dashed the blood away from his eyes with the flat of his hand. I fell, damn it, right at the start, and hit my head. "Where are they all? Have we got 'em?" Mila alighted in the boat beside us. "2 are running," she said. "They are together. Hasten." We jumped out of the boat. Mila flew up, and we followed her guidance through the dense woods. We could make much better speed, I knew, than the Mercutians. "We'll get them all," Ollie I shouted at Mercer. "They are not far ahead. See up there, Mila's evidently over them now." We came up to them after a few hundred yards. It was the old man, and one of those whom I had first encountered. They did not wait for us to attack them, but stopped stock still, flinging their arms wide in token of surrender. Mila came down among us, and we went back to where we had lain hidden in the palmettos. There we had left a number of short lengths of rope. While we were tying the arms of these 2 prisoners behind them and fettering their ankles so they could not run, Anina joined us. "2 in water," she cried, and then added something to Mila. 2 were in the water. Now they are in the woods, running. Alina will show you. Mila stood guard in the boat over our first 2 prisoners, while Mercer and I rounded up the others. It was half an hour or more before we had them all trussed up, but none of the 10 escaped. We were a long time reviving 2 of those we had injured, but finally we had them all lying or sitting in the boat. Mercer's head had stopped bleeding. He washed it, and I found his injury no more than an ugly scalp wound. "Fell and cut it on something," he explained lugubriously. "Couldn't see for the blood in my eyes. But we got 'em, didn't we?" Under Mila's direction, Mercer and I shoved the boat out into the stream. I need not go into details regarding the propelling mechanism of this craft. Mila explained it hastily to me as we got underway. It used a form of the light ray from a sort of strange battery. The intense heat of the ray generated a great pressure of superheated steam in a thick metal cylinder underneath the keel. This steam escaped through a nozzle underwater at the stern of the boat, and its thrust against the water propelled the boat forward. The boat was constructed to draw very little water, and when going fast its bow planed upward until only the stern of the hull touched the surface. It was steered by a rudder not much different from some of those types we are familiar with on Earth. When we got out into open water, I found the boat was capable of great speed. This I attributed not so much to the efficacy of its propelling force as to the lightness of the boat itself. It was built of some metal that I may perhaps compare with aluminium, only this was far stronger and lighter. The boat was, in fact, a mere shell, extraordinarily buoyant. Mila sat in the stern, steering and operating the mechanism. I sat with her. Mercer was faithful forward, beside Anina, talking to her earnestly. Our prisoners lay huddled in various attitudes, frightened, all of them, and obviously in no condition to give us further trouble. They were, I saw now, not ruffians by any means, but rather men of superior intelligence, selected by Tao evidently as those best fitted for spreading his propaganda among the people of the great city. We made slow progress down the bayou. Some of its turns were so sharp and so overhung with trees, and obstructed by fallen logs, we could hardly get through. During the latter part of the trip the bayou broadened rapidly, dividing into many channels like a delta. We came out into the open sea finally, a broad, empty expanse, with a mirror-like surface. The curvature of the planet was even more apparent now. It seemed almost as though the water should be sliding back downhill over the horizon. We turned to the left as we came out of the delta, and for the first time Mila put the boat to the limit of its speed. The best comparison I can make, I think, to this rapid, noiseless, smooth progress, is that of sailing on an iceboat. We sped along some 5 or 10 miles, keeping close inland. I saw some of the small thatched shacks along here, though not many. For a while the shore remained that same palm-lined, half-inundated marshland. Then gradually it began to change, and we came upon a broad beach of white sand. We landed here, and found the girls with the platform waiting for us. Mila took Anina and 1 or 2 of the older girls aside, and gave them last instructions. "What do I do, just dump them on the other shore?" Mercer asked me. "That's about it. I don't know the lay of the land over there. Alina does." "You do what she tells you." "You bet I will," he agreed enthusiastically. "Some kid, that little girl. We get along fine. She understands everything I say to her already. I'll have her talking English like a streak by the time you see her again." We had removed the cords from our prisoners' ankles. I motioned them to get out of the boat. We crowded Tao's men on the platform. They were surprised, and some of them alarmed, when they saw how we proposed to transport them over the water. Mila silenced their protests, and soon we had them all seated on the platform, with Mercer at the rear end facing them. The 50 girls grasped the platform handles. Another moment and they were in the air, with Mercer waving goodbye to us vigorously. Mila and Elle, left alone, watched them silently as they dwindled to a speck in the haze of the sky. We were about to start back when we saw a girl coming toward us, flying IOW over the water. "One of those we had directed to patrol the coast," Mila said when she came closer. She saw us, and came down on the beach. The 2 girls spoke together hurriedly. "Tao's men in the water city have caused great disturbance," Alan Mila said to me. "Where's the water city?" "Near the great city, across the marshlands. We must get back. And when Alina and our friend Ollie have returned we must go to the water city. It is very bad there," she said. Our trip back to the great city was without unusual incident. We followed the main route at the best speed we could make. "We shall tell our king, of course, about this disturbance," said Mila. "Perhaps he will think there is something he can do. But I fear greatly that unless he appeals directly to the people, and they are with him, he's an old man," I said, "and all his councillors are old. They are not fit to rule at such a time as this. Suppose he were to die, what would happen? Who would be king then? A little prince there is, a mere child. And there is our queen, a younger woman, only married to our king these few years. His first queen died." I questioned Mila concerning her government. It was, I soon learned, an autocracy in theory. But of later years the king's advanced age, and high-schooly old councillors whom he refused to change, had resulted in a vacillating policy of administration, which now, I could see plainly, left the government little or no real power. Only by constantly pandering to the wishes of the people could the king hold his throne. The supreme command was held by the king and his aged councillors. At stated intervals the more prominent men of each city met and enacted laws. The cities were each ruled by a governor in similar fashion, paying tribute to the central government somewhat after our old feudal system, but for practical purposes they acted as separate nations. They were united merely by the bonds of their common need of defense against the twilight people, and of intermarriage, which was frequent, since the virgins, flying about, often found mates in cities other than their own. There were courts in each city, not much more than rude tribunals, and jails in which the offenders were held. The police I have already mentioned. They, like the king's guards, were inclined in an emergency to do, not so much what they were ordered, as what they thought the people wished. It was all very extraordinary, but like many another makeshift government it served, after a fashion. Hiding the boat in another bayou, we took our way home on foot. That is to say, I ran, and Mila followed me, alternately flying and walking. We made our best speed this way, and very soon were back at home in the great city. We crossed the garden and entered the front door, expecting to find Lua in the living room, but she was not there. The house was quiet. She would wait up, she told me, Mila said, and, raising her voice, called her mother's name. There was no answer, although now I remember I thought I heard a footfall upstairs. We went up to Lua's room hurriedly. It was empty, and our loud cries of anxiety throughout the house evoked no response. We entered our own bedroom, and before I could make a move to defend myself I was seized tightly by both elbows from behind. At the same instant an arm hooked around my neck under my chin and jerked my head backward, and another pair of arms clutched me around the knees. I struggled vainly to free myself, shouting to Mila to run. But there were too many holding me. A moment more and my arms were tied behind me and a rope was about my legs. I was pushed into a chair, and as I sat down I saw Mila standing quietly nearby, with two Mercutians holding her by the arms and shoulders. The man who had pushed me to the seat bent down and struck me across the cheek with the flat of his hand. His grinning, malevolent face was only a few inches from mine. I saw that it was Chapter 18. Revolution. There seemed to be 5 of our captors, all of them as evil-looking men as I think I have ever seen. They rummaged about the room, evidently in search for weapons they thought I might have secreted. Then they ordered me to stand up, and without more ado led Mila and me from the house. This was once when I was glad of the interminable daylight. I hoped we might find some early risers about the streets, for I thought certainly the time of sleep must now be nearly over. But no one was in sight as we left the garden. We turned the first corner and headed toward the base of the mountain. To Bara's house they are taking us, I think. It is on the marshland below. Mila spoke without fear of our captors understanding the English words. We took advantage of this until after a moment we were roughly ordered to be quiet. Lua, we thought, must have been taken away before we arrived. We would find her at Bara's house when we arrived there. We had come down to the level marshlands now, the outskirts of the city, and were passing along a path between occasional shacks. Before us, standing alone in a rice paddy, I saw a larger, more pretentious house, a wooden structure on stilts, with a thatched roof, which Mila said was where Bara lived. We went in single file up its broad incline, and entered a squalid room with matting on the floor, a rude charcoal brazier at one side, and the remains of a previous meal lying on a table. 2 women were in the room as we entered. I took these to be Bara's wife and a servant. 2 naked little children lay on the floor, one of them crying lustily. Bara glanced around as he came in, and with what I took to be an oath ordered the children removed from the room. The slave woman, I could see she was a slave by the band upon her arm, picked them up. Evidently she did not move fast enough to suit Bara's temper, for as she straightened up the man cuffed her upon the head. She stumbled to one side against Bara's wife, who was standing there, and the other woman, with a sharp imprecation, struck her full in the breast. Neither of them saw the look she gave as she shuffled away, carrying the infants, but I did. It was a look of the most intense hatred, born and nourished, I realized, by long ill-treatment. Mila and I were now bound securely hand and foot, and Mila's wings were lashed to her body. Thus rendered entirely helpless, we were laid together in a corner. From the talk that followed, Mila gathered that Bara and his men were expecting the arrival of others. He roughly ordered his wife, a woman of the Twilight Country, obviously, to clear away the remains of their last meal and bring other food. She obeyed submissively. This, the first of the Twilight Country people I had seen, was a thick-set woman of perhaps 35, although she might have been older, for her black hair, which fell in an unkempt mass to her waist, was beginning to grey. She wore a single garment, a pair of silken trousers, drab with dirt. Her clipped wings were covered in the usual way. I could see now why Mila had said these twilight women could not fly, for this woman's torso was fat and flabby. Her skin was curiously pale, a dead, unpleasant white. Her face was broad, heavy and unintelligent. Her eyes were large and protruded slightly. Bara and his men ate breakfast, paying no further attention to Mila and me. Suddenly Mila spoke in a frightened whisper. "They are going now in a moment to the castle. The king they will kill." It was evidently a widespread plot we now overheard. Bara's followers had for some time been talking quietly with the lower classes, and, finding they could count on their support, planned now to murder the king. Then, with the queen and the little prince held as hostages, they expected that the men of science, threatened also with a revolt of the peons, would release the light ray. The light ray once in his control, Bara could make himself king. It seemed an absurd hope, but such was the plan they were now discussing. And what was far worse, I could see no way by which I could prevent the attempt. "They are going to the murder of the king," I whispered, incredulous. "Yes," Mila answered. "So they plan. Now, in a moment, before the time of sleep is over. Isn't he guarded? Can they get in the castle without arousing others?" "There are the guards, a few. But Bara has promised them great wealth, and they will stand aside and let him pass. So it is arranged." The arrival of several other men interrupted our whispered conversation. Bara, his meal over, consulted with them hurriedly. He then instructed his wife to watch us, and after a moment they all left the house. The woman, who was now the only occupant of the room with us, shuffled about, clearing away the meal. I tried desperately to work my hands loose, I even tried with my teeth to gnaw Mila's bonds, but without success. Every moment counted, if we were to do anything to save the king. I wondered again where Lua was, perhaps in another part of the house here, bound as we were. I whispered, "Ask for food. Tell her we have had nothing for many hours. Perhaps she will loosen our bonds a little to let us eat. We may be able to do something then." The woman answered Mila's pleading by setting us up side by side, with our backs against the wall. She placed food before us, and then, with a knife, cut the cords that bound our arms. My heart leaped exultantly, but, instead of leaving us and going on with her work, she sat down just out of reach, holding the knife in her hand and watching us narrowly. "We must eat, Mila," I said, using as casual a tone as I could and pointing to the food smilingly. "Eat, and pretend not to notice her. Perhaps I can get to my feet." We ate the food she had given us. I tensed the muscles of my legs, and believed that, bound as I was, I might be able to leap forward and reach the woman. It was almost hopeless to attempt it, for I realized she would meet my body with the dagger point. We were still eating, and I was thinking over this plan, when the slave woman appeared silently in a doorway across the room, behind the woman who faced us. Something in her attitude made me look away again casually and go on with my eating. Mila had evidently not noticed her. The slave woman came slowly toward us. A moment later she hurled herself upon Barra's wife from behind. At the same instant I threw myself forward, falling prone, but within reach of the seated woman. I gripped her with my hands, fumbling to catch her wrists, but before I could succeed she toppled forward and fell partly over me. I heard Mila give a cry of fright. I struggled free and raised myself up to a half-sitting position. Barra's wife lay beside me dead, with the slave woman's knife buried to the hilt in her back. Reaching over, I took the knife from the dead woman's fingers, and with it cut the cords that bound my ankles. I sprang to my feet. The slave had retreated and stood shrinking against the side of the room, terrified at what she had done. I paid no more attention to her for the moment, but hastened to release Mila. We searched the house hurriedly, calling to Lua, but she did not answer, nor could we find her. When we returned the slave woman was still standing where we had left her, staring with horrified eyes at the body of her mistress. "Tell her what she did was right," I said. "She may have saved the king. Tell her to go to your house and wait for us." The woman nodded eagerly when Mila told her what to do, and fell on her knees before us. "She says she will serve us always. She has been badly treated, Alan." We sent the woman away, and with a last hasty glance around hurriedly left the house alone with its single dead occupant. A large wooden mortar and pestle, used for pounding rice, stood in the kitchen. I carried the pestle away with me. It was nearly 5 feet long and quite heavy, an excellent weapon. We hastened up through the city, Mila half walking, half flying, and I carrying this bludgeon and running with 12-foot strides. But it was now hardly more than 3/4 of an hour since we had passed this way before, and there were still few people about to see us. Barra and his men had started some 20 minutes before us, I figured, and we must reach the castle before them. I made extraordinary progress over the level country. But I could not run uphill for long, and soon had to slow down to a walk. Mila kept closer to me now. "We approached the castle grounds. Where will the guards be, Mila? We must avoid them if we can. They might try to stop us." Mila did not know where they would be, but under the circumstances, as Barra had told his men, she believed the guards would disappear from the vicinity. This conjecture proved to be correct. The guards, not wishing to be concerned in the affair at all, had simply disappeared. We saw nothing of Barra and his men on the way up the mountain, although I had hoped we might overtake them. As we passed hurriedly through the palm gardens surrounding the castle, I saw its huge front doors were closed. "Enlila, we can't get in that way. A side entrance, or some other way." "No," she said. "There is a smaller door below, and others on the side." We hastened on. Suddenly I gripped Mila by the arm. "What's that, over there? See, beyond the grove." There seemed to be furtive figures lurking among the palms. "Those cannot be Baf's men, Mila, there are too many." What can it? We had reached a little doorway under the front terrace. There was no time to investigate these advancing figures. Barra and his men might already be inside the castle. I slid through the doorway, every muscle tense. Mila had brought the knife from Barra's shack, and with it clenched in her hand was close beside me. I wanted to make her stay outside, where she could fly away if danger threatened, but she pleaded to follow me, and I let her come. I needed her, since I had no idea of the interior arrangements of the building. We passed along a dim hallway and up a narrow flight of stone steps. Not a sound came to us. The interior of the castle was silent as a tomb. At the top of the steps we came almost directly into the inner patio of the building. Across a bed of tall flowers, nodding gently in a little morning breeze that swept down from above, I saw the head and shoulders of a man standing in the center of the courtyard. The lower part of his body was hidden by the flowers. I tried to duck out of sight, but he had seen me. He was not over 40 feet away. I stepped back, believing I could reach him in a single leap, but Mila held me. "Not you, Alan," He would out. The noise would bring others. She raised her knife, and her eyes blazed into mine. Never have I thought to kill a human. But now I, a woman, must kill. Stand quiet, Alan. She flew swiftly up and poised over the man. He had started toward us. Evidently he was, so far, as anxious for silence as we, for he made no sound. I saw now he was one of those who had come to Barra's shack. His naked shoulders, his thick neck, and bullet head were all that showed above the flower stems as he plowed his way through them directly toward me, but the hand he swung aloft to aid his progress held a knife. He glanced up at Mila, poised in the air above him, and saw the weapon in her hand. At this new enemy he stopped, confused. Mila swooped down at him, and he struck at her with his knife, but she avoided it with an incredibly swift turn, and a second later had passed him and was crossing the courtyard. Round and round she flew, her great wings flapping audibly, a giant bird circling its prey. The man turned continually to face her. Several times she swooped toward him, and as swiftly avoided his blow. From every side she threatened. The man stood now bewildered, striking wild in a frenzy, as one strikes at a darting wasp. At last, with an agonized CIY, he turned and ran. Instantly she dropped upon him, there was a flash of her white arm, the man's body crumpled and lay still among the flowers. Mila was back beside me. Her breast was heaving, her eyes were full of tears, she trembled. A terrible thing, Alan, my husband, for a woman to do, but it had to be. I pressed her hand with silent understanding. Come, Alan, she said. They will have heard his cry. The others, we must meet them, too. We must get to the king. A vibrant scream rang out from the silence of the house, a man's voice, shrill with agony, then suddenly stilled. Good God, Mila. The king, where is he? Take me there. She pulled me back through the doorway. A man scurried past. I leaped at him and struck him a glancing blow with the heavy wooden pestle. He stumbled to his knees. Without thought of giving quarter, I hit him again before he could rise. He sank back, senseless or dead. Mila was ahead of me, and I ran after her along a hallway. The sound of scurrying footsteps sounded from overhead, a woman screamed. A broad, curving stairway fronted us. I passed Mila halfway up, and, reaching the top, ran full into another man who darted from a doorway close by. The impact of my heavier body flung him backward to the floor. I leaped over him with a shout of warning to Mila, and ran on into the room. A man was standing stock still in its center. It was Barra. He flung his knife at me as I appeared, but it went wild. Two other men were coming toward me from opposite sides of the room. I swung the bludgeon about me viciously, keeping them away. Suddenly Barra shouted a command, and before I could reach any one of them they had scurried away like rats. A low bed with a huge canopy of silk stood against the wall. A woman knelt on the floor beside it, and against her knees huddled a little half-grown boy. I heard Mila's voice shouting in her own language. The sound of men running came from below. Then Mila's half-hysterical laughter, and then the words, "They are running away, Alan, all of them. I have been calling you to bring me the light ray. And they are running away." I turned to the bed, pushing its curtains aside, and then hurriedly closing them again with a shudder. Mila was beside me. "The king is dead, Mila. No, you must not look." Her eyes widened, her hand went to her breast. "There is one who needs you." I pointed to the woman on the floor. She was staring at us, unseeing, one arm flung about the child protectingly, holding him partially under one of her long, sleek red wings. The fingers of her other hand clutched convulsively at the bed coverings. She was moaning softly with a grief and terror all the more intense because it was restrained. "There is one who needs you, Mila," I repeated. "Comfort her, for we have come too late." The castle now was in thorough confusion. Several waiting maids rushed into the room, stared at their mistress and the little prince, and, seeing what had happened, stood silently wringing their hands in fright, or fled aimlessly through the halls. One of the king's councillors had come in, stopping, bewildered, at the scene that met him. "Tell him what has occurred, Mila," I said. There came now faintly to my ears from outside the castle sounds of a gathering crowd, murmurs and vague muffled shouts. The cries grew louder. A rain of missiles struck the castle, a stone came through a nearby window, falling almost at my feet. All at once I remembered the lurking figures we had seen among the palms in the garden. "Mila!" I cried. "Hear that, outside? A crowd is gathering. The men we saw, out there. People whom Bara has, Mila, ask him, for God's sake, to tell us how we can get weapons. Where are the other councillors? Send for them. We must do something, now, at once. This is revolution, Mila, don't you understand? Revolution." I felt so impotent. Here in this crisis I could talk to no one but Mila, could issue no direct commands, could understand the words of no one but her. Suddenly, from over our heads, a great, solemn deep-throated bell began tolling. "What is that? What does that mean?" A girl ilched into the room. "It is the bell of danger," said Mila quickly. "The girls are ringing it to arouse the city. Up here then will the people hurry to find out what it is that threatens." "They are outside now," I retorted. "Order all the king's councillors here at once. Find out if any guards are about the place. Send them here. Where is the head of the city's police? Send him here to me. Tell him to call out all his men." What was I saying? I had forgotten the one vital thing. Mila. The light ray. These men of science who guard it, where are they? Send for their leader. Get him here to me at once. We must have the Mila stood very quietly beside me. Her face was white, her eyes blazed, but she seemed calm and unfrightened. "He will come," she said, "land armed with the ray. The bell will bring him. Your other commands I will see are obeyed." The old councillor, who had been standing by, dazed, came slowly forward at Mila's call. The king's councillor. And all the others were like him. The king was dead, and here was the little prince huddled in his mother's arm. Realization had been slow in coming, but now it broke upon me like a great light. I flung the bludgeon away from me, and stood erect. I cried, tell them all, their king is dead. It is one who command now. There is no one else, and I have the power. Tell them that. It is El, the man from earth, who commands. Image 5 Chapter 19. The new ruler. The solemn bell continued pealing out its knell, the shouts and tumult outside were growing louder. Mila spoke hurriedly to the old man, then turned to leave the room. Your commands shall be obeyed, my husband, she said quietly. I felt again that sudden sense of helplessness as I saw her leave. Be careful, Mila. Order everyone in the castle to the roof. Here. Tell the queen before you go. Send everyone up there with me. The mob may come in. We'll make our stand up there. I understood Bara's plot better now. He had gathered his mob of peons to surround the castle and make a demonstration in his favor. Then, with the king dead and the queen and her little son held by him and his men, their lives as forfeits, he hoped to be able to treat with the men of science who controlled the light ray, and who, I did not doubt, represented the better element among the people. It seemed a mad plan at best, and now that it had gone wrong, I wondered what Bara would attempt to do. Evidently he and his henchmen had all left the castle, fearing the light ray, which Mila pretended I held. They were outside now, among the mob, I assumed. Would the mob attempt to enter? Mila hurried away to send everyone inside the building to its roof. The Queen, following Mila's commands unquestioningly, took the little prince by the hand and, signing to me to follow, led me upstairs. There was only one stairway leading to the roof, I found with satisfaction, and it was narrow, an excellent place for defense. The roof was broad and flat, flanked at the ends by two towers which rose considerably above it. It was a frightened little group who gathered about me, the Queen and her son, two of the King's councillors, and perhaps half a dozen young girls whom I took to be the Queen's attendants. Others came up each moment. I sat the Queen down on a little white stone bench in the centre of the garden, and bowed before her respectfully. Then I smiled upon them all. I think they were reassured and trusted me, and I found my commands were obeyed without question. The Queen was a woman of perhaps 35, tall and slender, with black hair and eyes. She was dressed in a single garment of heavy white silk, a dress that fell ungathered at the waist from above her breast under the arms to her ankles. It was, I judged, her sleeping robe. Her hair hung in two long braids over her shoulders, her feet were encased in sandals. She was unquestionably a beautiful woman. I remember my vague surprise, as I saw her, with her son by her side, and her long sleek wings unmutilated. And then I saw that her wings were fastened together in two places by little metal chains. She, then, like other married women, was not permitted to fly, although the beauty of her wings was unspoiled. I sent two of the old men to stand by the head of the stairs. Mila had given me her knife, and I handed it now to one of them, trying to make him understand that he was to bar the passage of anyone who should not be allowed up. He shuddered, but he took the knife and stood where I indicated. The crowd in the garden below had seen us on the roof now, and the tumult of shouts was doubled. I went to the parapet and looked over. The garden was full of a struggling, confused mass of people. Those nearest the castle were mostly peons. I noticed men and a few women armed with various implements of agriculture, and any sort of knied weapon they could obtain. They were standing about in little groups or rushing excitedly to and fro in aimless, uncommanded activity. Many of them held stones in their hands, which occasionally they cast at the building. It was one of those mobs that gather ready for trouble, is swayed in almost any direction by any chance leadership, and most frequently accomplishes nothing. I felt a sudden sense of relief. The garden was rapidly filling up with men and women of the more intelligent classes, who mingled with the others, learned what had occurred, for I did not doubt but that the knowledge of the King's death had spread about, and then stood waiting to see what would happen. The air was full of excited girls flying over the castle. A few alighted for a moment on the roof, but I did not fear them. Where was Bara? I could not hope to distinguish him among the crowd, but still I saw no sign of his leadership. Had he seen the failure of his plan and, fearing the results of his regicide, fled the vicinity? I hoped so fervently. As I showed myself at the parapet, a great shout arose. Some of the men, I knew at once it was those who had heard I possessed the light ray, scattered in terror at my appearance. I determined then, if no issue were raised that would demand my using this supposed weapon, I could continue to command the situation. I stood there a moment looking down. At the edge of the crowd I saw a few figures whom I took to be members of the city's police. They were standing idle, taking no part in what was going on. There seemed nothing I could do until Mila returned. If only I could speak to the crowd. I wondered if I dared descend among them and disperse the mob of peons. I went to the head of the stairway. 3 or 4 of the King's councillors were standing there. There was no one on the stairs, evidently everyone living in the castle was now on its roof, some 30 of them altogether. The crowd outside quite evidently had no present intention of entering the building. The mob of peons Bara had gathered were greatly in the minority now, and I felt that matters were steadily improving. I wondered where Mila was, and then while I was standing there I saw her coming up the stairs, a man following close behind her. I think I have never been so glad to see anyone as I was to see her at this moment. Her face was grave, her demeanour calm, as before. "He is here," she said as she came to the head of the stairs. "This is Fuuro, Alan, leader of the men of science, who have the ray." As he came out onto the roof, I saw this man was easily the most dominant personality I had so far encountered on Mercury. He was tall for his race, although several inches shorter than Elle, a man of 60, perhaps, with iron grey hair falling long about his ears. He wore sandals and a pair of the usual knee-length, wide-cut trousers. But what distinguished him in his dress was a broad panel of heavy silk, hanging from neck to knee, both in back and front, with an opening at the top through which his head was thrust. This silken panel was some 18 inches wide, light grey in colour, and richly embroidered in gold in various designs. It hung free, except for a slight fastening at the waistline. Beneath it the man's naked torso, and his bare arms, showed powerfully muscled. His face was smooth-shaven, with strong, regular features. I noticed, too, there was a slight cleft in his square chin. His forehead was high, his blue eyes kindly, yet with a searching, piercing quality about them. It was not so much the man's general appearance as his bearing that made me realize he was a forceful character. There was about him unmistakable poise. I knew at once he felt his power, his authority. That he would use it wisely I could not doubt. He stood regarding me gravely, an appraising regard under which I felt myself flushing a little. Mila spoke to him swiftly, and he inclined his head to me by way of introduction, his glance meanwhile taking in the scene on the roof. With Mila as interpreter we held a hurried conversation. I learned then that Fuuro and his associates had many years before organized a society for the development of the light ray in its various forms. They had soon realized in their experiments its diabolical power of destruction, and had taken oath then that they would not use it, or allow it to be used, except under the most critical circumstances of the nation's welfare. Realizing, too, the power it gave them as individuals, they had sworn to remain men of science only, taking no part in public affairs, remaining rigidly aloof from all national affairs. Most of their work concerned the development of the light ray for industrial purposes. In these fonds it developed heat, but had very little power of projection. All this Mila told me in a few brief sentences. "How did Tao get the ray?" I demanded. "Some members of the society proved false," she answered. "When Tao was banished to the Twilight Country they deserted their brothers and joined him. There were others with him of scientific mind, and these soon learned how to make it, too." Fuuro was still regarding me appraisingly. I felt suddenly very young, very inadequate as I stood there facing him. But I met his gaze squarely, and all at once he smiled. "He says, 'Let us speak to the people,'" said Mila. We went to the parapet. Only a few moments had elapsed since I had stood there before. The situation below was unchanged, except that the crowd had grown denser. A sudden hush fell as they saw us. Fuuro turned to me and spoke quietly, his eyes seemed searching out my thoughts. "He asks you, my husband, if you will take oath before your God to do what is right for our people. He wishes to trust you now in this crisis, for there is no one else, and he believes in you." "Elle will, Mila," I said solemnly. "Before God I swear it." The man gazed steadily into my eyes another instant, then abruptly he thrust a small metal cylinder into my hand. I thrilled as my fingers closed around it. He seemed to hesitate, then he turned and, slowly crossing the rooftop, looking neither to right nor left, he descended the stairs out of our sight. He had done what he thought was best, and, having done it, had withdrawn immediately from further participation in the affair. It may have been the absence of his dominant personality, or the grasp of my hand about this little metal cylinder, but now I felt a renewed sense of responsibility, and with it a feeling of power that swept aside all doubts and all fears. Now I could command, could guide and control, the destiny of this nation, and could, thank God, save my own world. I said, tell the Queen her son shall be king. I am about to proclaim him king before the people, and as regent, will rule. Tell her that, and bring him here now to me. The Queen made no answer, save a slight inclination of her head. But I saw that she had recovered composure. She pushed her son gently away from her, and I strode forward to meet him. Tell him, Mila, he is a man now, and must have no fear, for he is the greatest man in all this land. I patted his shoulder as he stood beside me, and he looked up into my face and smiled bravely. The top of the parapet was flat and broad. I raised the little boy up and stood him upon it. Instantly another tumult of shouts arose. I looked down and saw the figure of Fuuro as he stalked unheeding across the garden, the people respectfully opening up a path before his advance. Approval and derision seemed mingled in the cries that greeted the appearance of the little prince. Quiet them if I can, Mila, I said. Speak to them. I steadied the boy with my hand, and he stood there unafraid, a sturdy, manly little figure. Mila raised her voice and began speaking. The shouts partially ceased, then suddenly a stone struck the parapet almost in front of us. A sudden rage possessed me. I fumbled at the cylinder I held. It was very much like a little hand flashlight, and seemed to have a knob at my thumb. Mila stopped speaking and turned to me. There, press that, Alan. Careful. Aim it there. See. Over there against those palms. I held the thing up and pointed it toward the huge royal palms, aiming at their graceful fronds high over the heads of the people. My hand pressed the knob, the little cylinder seemed to thrill in my grasp. A tiny beam of light shot out quite plainly visible, a green, shading into red. It struck the palm branches, and silently yet rapidly, as though they were under some giant blowtorch, they shriveled, crackled, and burst into flame. Mila's fingers bit into my arm. Enough, Alan. Stop. My thumb yielded to the upward pressure of the tiny knob against it, and abruptly the light vanished. A narrow swath had been cut through the palms, a furrow of death plowed by the pressure of my thumb against a bit of metal. The crowd had frozen into the immobility of terror. Now, as the dreaded ray vanished as suddenly as it had sprung forth, they turned with cries of fright to escape. No one had been hurt. I shuddered as I realized now that many girls had been in the air, and through no thought or skill of mine had they escaped. Speak to them, Alan, Mila cried. There must be no panic. Here must they stay and listen to what you have to say. Speak to them, stop them now. I handed her the cylinder, lest the diabolical thing spit forth again its fire from my unskillful fingers, and leaped to the top of the parapet. Stop! I shouted at the top of my voice. Stop, all of you. At once. I waved my arms violently. I knew my words meant nothing, but my voice carried far. The excitement continued. But a few stopped and stared at me, then others, and gradually there was less confusion. Mila turned and shouted something to the girls on the rooftop. Instantly they spread their wings and flew down, circling close over the heads of the people. Wait, Alan. A moment now and there will be quiet. The girls are telling them not to fear, but to wait and listen to what you have to say. Mila stood now upon the parapet top, with the little prince between us. She had concealed the tiny metal cylinder in her belt, her open palms were flung out before her, and her wings, spread and flapping slowly, raised her on tiptoe. Every line of her graceful body was tense, her attitude bespoke power, dominance, authority. And then she began to talk in a voice vibrant with emotion. Once she laid her hand lightly upon the curly head of the little boy, and a tremulous, uncertain cheer answered her from below. Have told them of the king's death, Alan, she said a moment later, land that here is their little king standing before them, and now, of you, what shall I say? Tell them that until the king is older, I, the man from earth, shall rule them as regent. Tell them if they obey me all will be well, for I shall rule them wisely." I stood while Mila translated this amid dead silence from the crowd. As she finished, I raised myself to full height and stared down at them threateningly. "But if there is trouble, if anyone defies my authority, then, Mila, tell them I shall use the light ray, for I shall brook no interference." The silence from below continued. I spread my hands out before me and smiled. "But there will be no trouble. I am with the light country, heart and soul. Its interests are my interests, for I have married one of its women, and now I too am one of its people. Tao shall be overthrown, tell them that, Mila. The Twilight people never again shall threaten our cities. If more land is wanted by our people of the light country, tell them they shall have it. All the land they desire shall be theirs. For when Tao is vanquished I shall build great cars such as he is building, and all who wish may go to my earth peacefully, and we will make them welcome as I have been made welcome here." A cheer arose as Mila translated this, and now for the first time I heard no cries of dissent. "Say to them again I shall rule them wisely. Say I shall look to them, all of them, rich and poor alike, for help in what we have to do. All must help me, for I am only one, and I need them all. When this work we have to do is over, when our nation is freed forever from this menace from across the sea, tell them that then I will give my every thought to the details of their welfare. All that they wish, if it lays in my power, shall be done." A girl alighted for an instant on the parapet near me, another darted downward in her flight, evidently to avoid the disrespect of passing directly in front of me. The thought flashed through my mind that I might mention the virgins and promise them reversal of the law they so abhorred, but I felt it would be impolitic to raise that question at such a time as this. "Tell them now to leave the grounds," quietly I concluded. "When I wish them again they will be sent for. All that I do will be known through public proclamation." I lifted the little prince in my arms, and then, with the cheers of the people ringing in my ears, jumped backward with him to the roof below. Thus, by swift-moving circumstances which could not have been foreseen, was I made ruler of the light country. The crowd dispersed quietly. We sent the queen and her waiting maids back to her apartments, the aged councillors to theirs, and soon Mila and I were alone in one of the castle rooms. Now that the nervous excitement under which I had been laboring was over, I felt utterly exhausted. I dropped wearily into a seat, and Mila sat on the floor at my feet with her arms on my knees. I stroked her glossy black hair idly. "I'm tired, girl. I'm all in. Aren't you?" We had not slept since the afternoon before, and so much had happened since. Suddenly I remembered Lua. "Mila, your mother. We must find her." I started to my feet, then sat down again. There was no use of my rushing away on some aimless search over a city like this. "Where is the head of the city's police, Mila? Have sent for him. He should be here now to see you. Must have him search the city. Lua must be found. The castle guards, we must appoint others, Mila. I must have a council, too, not doddering old men, but others that we shall select. Who collects the taxes? Where is the money? Who handles it?" The questions piled upon me faster than I could voice them, and all the while my tired brain and weary, aching body called only for rest, for sleep. I thought of Mercer and Anina. They should be back by now. We must send home and have them told we are here, Mila. And that slave woman of Baras, she will be there, too. She must be sent here to us also. We had decided to live in the castle. When Mercer and Anina return, we must arrange to go to the Water City. The disturbance there must be quelled. All the cities must be told of our actions here. I must visit them all, Mila. My voice seemed trailing off as though I were talking to myself. 1,000 problems rushed in confusion through my mind. I felt I was talking almost incoherently. A knock on the door of our room brought me to myself. A young girl stood respectfully on the threshold. Mila listened to what she had to say, questioned her swiftly, and then turned to me. Her face had gone suddenly white. "The girls have returned from over the sea, Alan. This is one of them. But Alina and our friend Ollie have stayed there." "Stayed there?" I cried. "Why?" "They set free Dow's men as we planned. They were on their way back when the Earthman suddenly bid Anina return." "Something was wrong," he said. "This girl does not understand what." "But they went back. And Anina and Ollie they left there, standing on the shore together. We are to go over to the same place tonight, if we can, and get them. That is all the girl knows." The girl withdrew after a moment. Mercer and Anina left in the twilight country. Mila and I stared at each other blankly. Chapter 20. In the twilight country. Mercer sat on the rear end of the platform and waved goodbye vigorously as he was carried swiftly up and out over the water. Under him was a pile of blankets and a coat, and beside him a box of baked dough-like bread, the food he was to turn over to Dow's emissaries when he set them free. Alina flew at his side, at intervals smiling up at him reassuringly. Before him on the platform his captives huddled. Although all of them were trussed up securely, he menacingly kept his little wooden revolver pointed at them from the level of his knee. He chuckled as he thought of the fight at the bayou. Everything was working out all right. It was surprising what one could do with his physical strength here on Mercury. The girls had carried the platform up some 500 feet above the sea. Mercer turned and looked back. The shore had already dropped almost to the rim of the close encircling horizon. He leaned over toward Alina, resting one hand on the bamboo handle she was holding. "How long will it take us to get there, Anina?" He knew the girl would understand his words, but he did not realize she had little basis for comparing time in his language. "Long time," she answered, smiling. "But we go quickly now." He sat back again and waited. It seemed like hours. It was hours, probably 3 or 4, and still they swept onward straight as an arrow. After another interminable interval Alina raised one hand and pointed ahead. "Twilight country, there," she said. Mercer saw, coming up over the horizon, the dim outlines of a rocky land sparsely covered with trees. It spread out rapidly before him as he watched, fascinated. It seemed a desolate land, a line of low, barren hills off to one side, and a forest of stunted, naked-looking trees in front. The platform swept on over the shoreline, a rocky beach on which the calm sea rolled up in tiny white lines of breakers. Then in a great curve the girls circled to one side. "Where are we going?" Mercer asked. "A trail, near us somewhere. A trail to the lone city. There we land." Mercer saw the trail in a moment. It came out of the woods and struck the shore by a little bight where boats could land. The girls swooped downward, and in a moment more the platform was lying motionless on the beach. Mercer looked around. It was light enough to see objects in the immediate foreground, a grey twilight. The forest came almost to the water's edge. He saw now the trees might have been firs, but with small, twisted trunks, few branches except near the top, and very few leaves. They seemed somehow very naked and starved. Indeed, it surprised him that they could grow at all in such a rocky waste. The end of the trail was close before him. It appeared merely an opening in the trees with the fallen logs and underbrush cleared away. The girls were obviously cold, standing idle now after their long flight. Mercer lost no time in preparing for the return journey. He tumbled his captives unceremoniously off the platform and set the box of food and blankets beside them. "What's this, Anina?" He was holding in his palm a tiny metal cylinder. Anina took it from him. "For fire," see. She picked up a bit of driftwood, and, holding the end of the cylinder against it, pressed a little button. A curl of smoke rose from the wood, and in a moment a wisp of flame. A light ray! Mercer exclaimed. The ray, but different. She tossed the blazing bit of wood aside, and held her hand a foot or so in front of the cylinder. No danger. See. She brought her hand closer. Heat here, close, no heat far away. Mercer understood then that this was not a light ray projector, but a method of producing heat with the property of radiation, but not of projection, a different and harmless form of the ray. He took the little cylinder from the girl, inspected it curiously, then laid it on the blankets. They'll need it, I guess, if it's any colder where they are going. He set one of the captives free. Anina, tell him to sit quiet until we've gone. Then he can cut the others loose. He tossed a knife into the box. Come on, Anina, let's get away. They were about ready to start back, when Mercer suddenly decided he was hungry. He hopped off the platform. They don't need all that food. He gathered some of the little flat cakes of dough in his hands. Want some? He offered them to the girls, who smilingly refused. All right. I do. I'm hungry. Might as well take a blanket, too. It's devilish cold. He was back on the platform in a moment, sitting down with the blanket about his knees and munching contentedly at the bread. All right, Anina. Start her off. They swung up into the air and began the return flight. A few hours more and they would be back at the great city. Then the real work would begin. Mercer squared his shoulders unconsciously as he thought of all there was to do. But there was no danger to the light country from Tao, he thought with satisfaction. At least, there would be none when the other cities were rid of Tao's men, as the great city was now. The men would find their way back all right. At the sudden thought that came to him, Mercer dropped his bit of bread and sat up in astonishment. Tao no longer a menace. He remembered my reasoning in the boat coming down the bayou. Of course, Tao would have no reason to attack the light country by force of arms until he was sure his propaganda among the people had failed. My argument was sound enough, but the utter stupidity of what we had done now dawned on Mercer with overwhelming force. Tao would await the results of his emissaries' work, of course. And here we had gone and sent them straight back to their leader to report their efforts a failure. If anything were needed to precipitate an invasion from Tao, this thing Mercer had just finished doing was it. He cursed himself and me fervently as he thought what fools we had been. Then it occurred to him perhaps it was not too late to repair the damage. Not more than half an hour had passed since he had set the men free on the shore of the twilight country. He must go back at once. Under no circumstances must they be allowed to reach Tao and tell him what had occurred. Alina was flying near Mercer as before. He leaned over the edge of the platform to talk with her, but the wind of their forward flight and the noise of the girl's wings made conversation difficult. Anina. Come up here with me. Sit here. I want to talk to you. It's important. They don't need you flying now. Obediently the girl sat where he indicated, close beside him. And then as he was about to begin telling her what was in his mind, Mercer suddenly remembered that they were still heading toward the light country. Evilly meant getting farther away from Tao's men, whose homeward journey he must head off some way. We must go back, Alina, back where we came from, at once. Tell them, now. Then I'll tell you why. The girl's eyes widened, but she did as he directed, and the platform, making a broad, sweeping turn, headed back toward the twilight country shore. Anina, how far is it to Tao's city from where we landed? The lone city? A day, going fast. But they won't go fast, will they? Some of them are pretty badly hurt. 2 days for them, the girl agreed. Mercer then told her what an error we had made. She listened quietly, but he knew she understood, not only his words, but the whole situation as he viewed it then. "In lost bad," she said solemnly when he paused. "That's what I want to tell you, it's bad," he declared. "Got to head them off some way, stop them somehow. I don't see how we're going to capture them again, 10 of them against me. But we've got to do something." Then he asked her about the lay of the country between the shore of the sea and the lone city. Alina's English was put to severe test by her explanation, but she knew far many more words than she had ever used, and now, with the interest of what she had to say, she lost much of the diffidence which before had restrained her. She told him that the trail led back through the forest for some distance, and then ran parallel with a swift-flowing river. This river, he explained, emptied into the narrow sea a few miles below the end of the trail. It was the direct water route to the lone city. The trail, striking the river bank, followed it up into a mountainous country, a metallic waste where few trees grew. There was a place still farther up in a very wild, broken country, where the river ran through a deep, narrow gorge, and the trail followed a narrow ledge part way up one of its precipitous sides. Alina's eyes sparkled with eagerness as she told of it. "There, my friend Ollie, we stop them. Many loose stones there are, and the path is very narrow." Mercer saw her plan at once. They could bar the men's passage somewhere along this rocky trail, and with stones drive them back. He realized with satisfaction that he could throw a stone fully twice as large and twice as far as any of the men, and thus, out of range, bombard them until they would be glad enough to turn back. His plan, then, was to land, and with Anina follow the men. The rest of the girls he would send back to me with the platform, to tell Mila and me to come over the next evening to the end of the trail. He and Anina meanwhile would keep close behind the men, and then when the cannon was neared, get around in front of them, and bar their farther advance. This would be easy since he could walk and run much faster than they, and Anina could fly. He would drive them back out of the gorge, send Alina to keep the appointment with me and bring me up to him with the girls and the platform. They reached the shore and landed within a few feet of where they had been an hour before. The men were not in sight, nothing remained to show they had been there, save pieces of cut cord lying about. Alina now instructed the girls what to tell me, and in a moment more, with the blanket and a few pieces of bread, she and Mercer were left standing alone on the rocky beach. Alina was cold. He took off his fur jacket and wrapped it about her shoulders. She made a quaint little picture standing there, with her 2 long braids of golden hair, and her blue feathered wings which the jacket only partly covered. They started up the trail together. It was almost dark in the woods, but soon their eyes grew accustomed to the dim light, and they could see a little better. They walked as rapidly as Anina was able, for the men had nearly an hour's start, and Mercer concluded they would be far ahead. They had gone perhaps a mile, climbing along over fallen logs, walking sometimes on the larger tree trunks lying prone, rude bridges by which the trail crossed some ravine, when Anina said, "Fly now. You wait here, Ollie, and I find where they are." She handed him the coat and flew up over the tree tops, disappearing almost immediately in the darkness. Mercer slung the coat around him and sat down to wait. He sat there perhaps 15 or 20 minutes, staring up at the silent, motionless tree tops, and thinking all sorts of vague, impossible dangers impending. Then he heard her wings flapping and saw her flitting down through the trees. "Very near, they are," she said as soon as she reached the ground. "I fire, they have, and they are ready now to sleep." They went on slowly along the trail, and soon saw the glimmer of a fire ahead. "A camp for the night," whispered Mercer. It must be nearly morning now. He looked about him and smiled as he realized that no light would come with the morning. Always this same dim twilight here, and eternal darkness on ahead. "Good Lord, what a place to live," he muttered. They crept on cautiously until they were within sight of the camp. A large fire was burning briskly. Most of the men were wrapped in their blankets, apparently asleep, 3 were sitting upright, on guard. Mercer and Anina crept away. "We'd better camp," 2 Mercer said when they were well out of hearing. "They will probably stay there 4 or 5 hours, anyway. Lord, I'm tired." He laid his hand on her shoulder gently, almost timidly. "Aren't you tired, too, little girl?" "Yes," she answered simply, and met his eyes with her gentle little smile. "Oh, yes, I tired. Very much." They did not dare light a fire, nor had they any means of doing so. They went back from the trail a short distance, finding a little recess between 2 fallen logs, where the ground was soft with a heavy moss. Here they decided to sleep for a few hours. A small pool of water had collected on a barren surface of rock nearby, and from this they drank. Then they sat down, together, and ate about half the few remaining pieces of bread which Mercer was carrying in the pockets of his jacket. They were both tired out. Alina particularly was very sleepy. When they had finished eating, Anina lay down, and Mercer covered her with the blanket. She smiled up at him. "Good night, Anina." "Good night, my friend Ollie." She closed her eyes, snuggling closer under the blanket with a contented little sigh. Mercer put on his jacket and sat down beside her, his chin cupped in his hand. It seemed colder now. His trousers were thin, his legs felt numb and stiff from his recent exertion. He sat quiet, staring at the sleeping girl. She was very beautiful and very sweet, lying there with her golden hair framing her face, her little head pillowed on her arms, a portion of one blue feathered wing peeping out from under the blanket. All at once Mercer bent over and kissed her lightly, brushing her lips with his, as one kisses a sleeping child. She stirred, then opened her eyes and smiled up at him again. "You cold, Ollie," she said accusingly. She lifted an edge of the blanket. You sleep, too." He stretched himself beside her, and she flung a corner of the blanket over him, and thus, like 2 children lost in the woods and huddled together for warmth under a fallen log, they slept. Chapter 21. Another light ray. The news that Mercer and Anina had been left in the twilight country completely dumbfounded Mila and me. Something was wrong, Mercer had said. And then they had insisted on staying there, and had sent the girls back to tell me to come over. We could make nothing of it, nor did the half-hour of argument into which we immediately plunged further enlighten us. That flaw in our plans which had dawned on Mercer so suddenly and clearly certainly never occurred to us, for all it was seemingly so obvious. We were interrupted, having reached no conclusion whatever except that we would go over that evening as Mercer had directed, by the arrival of the police chief to see me. He was a little man, curiously thin and wizened for a Mercutian, with wide pantaloons, a shirt, short jacket and little triangular cocked hat. His face seemed pointed, like a ferret. His movements were rapid, his roving glance peculiarly alert. He bowed before me obsequiously. He would obey me to the letter, I could see that at once from his manner, though, had I impressed him as being like my predecessor, I did not doubt but that he would do as he pleased upon occasion. I toyed with the little light ray cylinder in my hand quite casually through the brief interview, and I saw he was thoroughly impressed, for he seemed unable to take his eyes from it. "Where are your men just now?" I asked. He raised his hands deprecatingly and poured out a flood of words to Mila when my question was translated to him. He himself was sleeping, she said to me when he had paused for breath. His 3rd watch was on patrol about the city. Then from the castle came the king's guards, fleeing in haste. Those of the police they met, they told that evil men were in the castle with the light ray, and all who represented the city's authority would be killed. That was a lie, I interrupted. There was no light ray here then? Mila nodded. It was what Barras' men had told them to say, I think. And then what happened to the police? Then they left their posts about the city. Some fled, others went back and reported what they had heard. And it never occurred to any of them to come up here and try to stop the disturbance? Curious policemen, these. It is too deadly, the light ray said Mila. They were afraid. And then the alarm bell began ringing. They sent for Alo, here, to ask him what they should do. And then you sent for him? He has his men at the police building, in waiting. And he comes to you at the risk of his life, and now asks your commands. Thus did my chief of police explain satisfactorily to himself, and with great protestations of loyalty to his TMST, how it came about that he and his men did nothing while their king was being murdered and another put in his place. Recriminations seemed useless. He stood bowing and scraping before me, eager only to obey my slightest wish. Tell him, Mila, how Barras' men captured Lua. Have the city thoroughly searched, Barras' house particularly. Tell him I killed Barras' wife. Have that slave woman sent home to me. Tell him to capture Barra and any of his known associates. If he does, have him report to me at once. Say to him that I must have word of Lua, or I'll have a new chief of police by tomorrow. For the rest, have his men patrol the city as usual. I spoke as sternly as I could, and the little man received my words with voluble protestations of extreme activity on his part. When he had bowed himself out, I smiled at Mila hopelessly. This has got to be a mighty different government before we can ever hope to accomplish anything against Dao. Dao was not worrying me for the moment. Lua must be found, and I had no idea of relying entirely upon this little chief of police to find her. And Mercer needed me, too, this very evening. I stood up wearily and put my arm about Mila's shoulders. Her little body drooped against mine, her head resting on my shoulder. There was little about us then, as we stood there dispirited and physically tired out, that would have commanded respect from our subjects. Must get some sleep, Mila, I said. Things will look very different to us then. It must have been mid-afternoon when we awoke. Aino was at hand to report that Barra and his men, and all the king's guards, must have fled the city. Of Lua he had, so far, found no trace. Barra's slave woman was in the castle, waiting our commands. The girl who had brought us Mercer's message was also waiting to ask us when we wanted her and the other girls for the trip back to the Twilight Country. Right away I exclaimed. I'm not going to take any chances with Mercer. We'll start at once. The girl flew away to get her friends and the platform, which had been left in the garden of Mila's home. I planned to start openly from the castle roof. There was now no need of maintaining secrecy. The disappearance of Lua was alarming. Equally so was the possible danger into which Mercer might have blundered. In Lua's case there did not seem much I could do personally at that moment. Before starting I arranged with the aged councillors to call a meeting the following morning of all government officials. Could we get Fuuro to come, Mila? She shook her head positively. His oath would forbid it. Well, tell the councillors to call also any of the city's prominent men. I've got to get some good men with me. I can't do it all alone. Mila smiled at me quizzically as I said this. You have forgotten our women and their help, my husband. I had, in truth, for the moment. We'll need them, too, I said. Tell these girls who carry us tonight to call all those who went with us to the mountains, a meeting tomorrow at this time, here on the castle roof. Ito the water city we must go, Mila said. Their Dao's men are very strong, our girls report. And today there was a fight among the people, and several were killed. But we must go armed, Mila, with more than one light ray. I shall see this Fuuro tomorrow. After all, here's the keynote to the whole thing. We started from the castle roof, Mila sitting with me this time on the platform. Flying low, we passed over the maze of bayous, and in what seemed an incredibly short time we were out over the sea. I had now no idea what we might be called upon to do, or how long we would be gone, for all my specific plans for the next day, so we started as well prepared as possible. The precious light ray cylinder I held in my hand. We had a number of blankets, enough food for us all for 2 days of careful rationing, a knife or two, and a heavy, sharp-edged metal implement like an axe. It seemed hardly more than half an hour before a great black cloud had spread over the whole sky, and we ran into the worst storm I have ever encountered. The wind came up suddenly, and we fought our way directly into it. Lightning flashed about us, and then came the rain, slanting down in great sheets. We were still flying low. The mirror surface of the sea was now lashed with waves, extraordinarily high, whose white tops blew away in long streaks of scud. The girls fought sturdily against the wind and rain, carrying us steadily up until after a while I could not see the water below. We were in the storm perhaps an hour altogether. Then we passed up and beyond it, and emerged again into that grey vacancy, with a waste of storm-lashed water far beneath us. The twilight country shore was still below the horizon, and it was a considerable time before we sighted it. Mila and I sat quiet, wrapped in a blanket, which, wet as it was, offered some protection against the biting wind. The girls seemed exhausted from their long struggle against the storm, and I was glad for them when we finally landed. This was the place, they said, where Mercer and Anina had set Dow's men free, and where the two were standing when the girls had left with the platform. I looked about, and saw on the beach the pieces of cut cord with which the men had been bound. Of Mercer and Anina there was no sign. We waited until well after the time of the evening meal, and still Mercer and Alina did not arrive. We concluded, of course, that they had followed Dow's men up the trail for some reason, and we expected it would be Alina who would come back to tell us where Mercer was. "Let us go up a little distance," Mila suggested finally. "They cannot tell what the hour is. They may be near here now, coming back." The girls were rested and warmed now, and we started off again with the platform. We flew low over the tree tops, following the trail as best we could, but in the semi-darkness we could see very little from above. After a time we gave it up and returned to the shore. Again we waited, now very much alarmed. And then finally we decided to return to the great city for the night. Anina might have missed us some way, we thought, and flown directly home. She might be there waiting for us when we arrived. If not, we would return again with several hundred girls, and with them scour the country carefully back as near the lone city as we dared go. With our hearts heavy with apprehension we started back across the channel. Lua, Mercer and Anina were separated from us. All had been captured, perhaps, by our enemies. Things were, indeed, in a very bad way. Without unusual incident we sighted the light country shore. 3 girls were winging their way swiftly toward us. "They wish to speak with us," Alan said. Mila. "From the great city they seem to come. Perhaps it is Anina." Our hopes were soon dispelled, for Anina was not one of them. They were 3 of the girls we had directed to patrol the sea coast. When they neared us Mila flew off the platform and joined them. They circled about for a time, flying close together, then Mila left them and returned to me, while they hovered overhead. Her face was clouded with anxiety as she alighted beside me. They were near the water city a short time ago. And they say the light ray is being used there. They saw it flashing up, and dared not go closer. The light ray in the water city. My heart sunk with dismay. The cylinder I held in my hand I had thought the only one in use in all the light country. With it I felt supreme. And now they had it also in the water city. One of the girls flung up her hand suddenly and called to Mila. "See, Alan, a boat." I looked down to where Mila pointed. The sea was still rough from the storm, but no longer lashed into fury. Coming toward us, close inshore and from the direction of the water city, I saw a boat speeding along over the spent waves. And as I looked, a narrow beam of light, green, shading into red, shot up from the boat and hung wavering in the air like a little searchlight striving to pierce the grey mist of the sky. Chapter 22. The theft of the light ray. The touch of soft, cool hands on his face brought Mercer back to sudden consciousness. He opened his eyes, and Ina was sitting beside him, regarding him gravely. "Wake up, my friend Ollie. Time now to wake up." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The same dim twilight obscured everything around. For an instant he was confused. "Why, I've been asleep." He got to his feet. "Do you think it's been long, Anina? Maybe the men have started off. Let's go see." Alina had already been to see. She had awakened some little time before and, leaving Mercer asleep, had flown up ahead over the tree tops. The men were just then breaking camp, and she had returned to wake up Mercer. They ate their last remaining pieces of bread, drank from the little pool of water, and were soon ready to start on after their quarry. "How long will it take them to reach the gorge, Anina?" "Not very long, 4 times farther reach Lone City." By which Mercer inferred that within 3 or 4 hours, perhaps, they would be at the place where they hoped to turn the men back. They started off slowly up the trail, Mercer carrying the folded blanket, and Anina wearing the fur jacket. They soon came upon the smouldering fire that marked the other party's night encampment. The men were, Mercer judged, perhaps a mile or so ahead of them. They continued on, walking slowly, for they did not want to overtake the slow-travelling men ahead. The look of the country, what they could see of it in the darkness, was unchanged. The trail seemed bending steadily to the right, and after a time they came to the bank of a river which the trail followed. It was a broad stream, perhaps a quarter of a mile across, with a considerable current sweeping down to the sea. They kept to the trail along the river bank for nearly another hour. Then Alina abruptly halted, pulling Mercer partly behind a tree trunk. "Another fire," she whispered. They stopped again. They could see the glow of the fire, close by the river bank among the trees. Very cautiously they approached and soon made out the vague outlines of a boat moored to the bank. It seemed similar to the one in which they had come down the bayous from the great city, only slightly larger. "Other men," whispered Anina. "From Lone City." Mercer's heart sank. A party from the Lone City, more of Dow's men to join those he had set free. All his fine plans were swept away. The men would all go up to the Lone City now in the boat, of course. There was nothing he could do to stop them. And now Dow would learn of the failure of his plans. Mercer's first idea was to give up and return to the shore of the sea, but Anina kept on going cautiously forward, and he followed her. The fire, they could see as they got closer, was built a little back from the water, with a slight rise of ground between it and the boat. There were some 30 men gathered around. They seemed to be cooking. "You stand here," Ollie, Anina whispered. "Go hear what they say. Stand very quiet and wait. I come back." Mercer sat down with his back against a tree and waited. Alina disappeared almost immediately. He heard no sound of her flight, but a moment later he thought he saw her dropping down through the trees just outside the circle of light from the fire. From where he was sitting he could see the boat also. He thought he made out the figure 0F, a man sitting in it, 011 guard. The situation, as Mercer understood it from what Alina told him when she resumed, seemed immeasurably worse even than he had anticipated. Dow had been making the water city the basis of his insidious propaganda, rather than the great city, as we had supposed. He had been in constant communication by boat with his men in the water city, and now affairs there were ripe for more drastic operations. This boat Mercer had come upon was intended to be Dow's first armed invasion of the light country, some 20 of his most trusted men armed with the light ray. Joining his emissaries in the water city, and with the large following among the people there which they had already secured, They planned to seize the government and obtain control of the city. Then, using it as a base, they could spread out for a conquest of the entire nation. Mercer listened with whitening face while Anina told him all this as best she could. But why does he want to attack the Light Country, Anina? I thought he wanted to go and conquer our Earth. Very big task, your Earth, the girl answered. Light Country more easy. Many light rays in the great city. Those he needs before he goes to your Earth. More simple to get those than make others. Mercer understood it then. The large quantity of light ray ammunition stored in the great city was what Tao was after. This was his way of getting it, and once he had it, and control of the Light Country besides, he would be in a much better position to attack the Earth. The idea came to Mercer then to steal the boat and escape with it. If he could do that, the enemies would have to return to the lone city on foot, and the threatened invasion of the Light Country would thus be postponed for a time at least. Meanwhile, with the boat he could hasten back to me with news of the coming invasion. These thoughts were running through his head while Anina was talking. It was a daring plan, but it might be done. There was apparently only one man in the boat, and the slight rise of ground between it and the fire made him out of sight, though not out of hearing, of the others. Can you run the boat, Alina? The girl nodded eagerly. Mercer drew a long breath. We'll take a chance. It's the only way. They've got that cursed light ray. He shivered as he thought of the danger they were about to invite. Then he explained to Anina what they were to do. She listened carefully, with the same expectant, eager look on her face he had seen there so often before. They left the blanket and fur jacket on the ground, and, making a wide detour around the fire, came back to the river bank several hundred yards above the boat. They stood at the water's edge, looking about them. The boat was just around a slight bend in the stream. The glimmer of the fire showed plainly among the trees. Intense quiet prevailed, only the murmur of the water flowing past, and occasionally the raised voice of one of the men about the fire, broke the stillness. Mercer stared searchingly into the girl's eyes as she stood there quietly at his side. She met his gaze steadily. You're a wonderful little girl, he whispered to her, and then abruptly added, come on. Don't make any splash if you can help it. And remember, if anything goes wrong, never mind me. Fly away, if you can. They waded slowly into the water. The current carried them rapidly along. Side by side, with slow, careful strokes, they swam, keeping close to shore. The river was shallow, hardly over their heads. The water was cold and, Mercer thought, curiously buoyant. It seemed hardly more than a moment before the shadowy black figure of outlines of the boat loomed ahead. They could make out the figure of its single occupant, sitting with his arm on the gunwale. They swam hardly at all now, letting the current carry them forward. As silent as two drifting logs they dropped down upon the boat and in another moment were clinging to a bit of rope that chanced to be hanging over its stern. The bow of the boat was nosed against the bank. It lay diagonally downstream, with its stern some 20 feet from shore. Its occupant was sitting amidships, facing the bow. Mercer drew himself up until his eyes were above the stern of the boat and saw him plainly. He was slouching down as though dozing. His elbow was crooked, carelessly over the gunwale. Mercer's heart gave an exultant leap as he saw a little cylinder in the man's hand. There was a little projection on the boat at the waterline, and, working along this with his hands, Mercer edged slowly toward the man. He knew he could not be heard, for the murmur of the water slipping past the sides of the boat drowned the slight noise he made. He edged his way along, with not much more than his face out of water, until he was directly beneath the motionless form in the boat. Mercer's heart was beating so it seemed to smother him. Slowly he pulled himself up until the fingers of his left hand gripped the gunwale hardly more than a foot or two behind the man's back. His other hand reached forward. He must have made a slight noise, for the man sat suddenly upright, listening. Mercer's right hand shot out. His fingers closed over the little cylinder and the hand holding it. He bent it inward, twisting the man's wrist. His thumb fumbled for the little button Anina had described. There was a tiny puff of light, the man's body wavered, then fell forward inert. Mercer climbed into the boat. He looked back. Anina was pulling herself up over the stern. A long pole lay across the seats. He picked it up and started with it toward the bow. And then he tripped over something and fell headlong, dropping the pole with a clatter. As he picked himself up, there came a shout from the men in the woods. Mercer hurried forward and cast off the rope that held the boat to the bank. It had been tied more or less permanently at this end. As he fumbled at the knots, he heard Alina's soft, anxious voice calling, "Hurry, Ollie, hurry." The shouts from the woods continued. The knots loosened finally. The boat slid back away from the bank. With the pole, Mercer shoved the bow around. An instant later Anina had started the mechanism, and in a broad curve they swung silently out into the river. Up from the woods shot a beam of the greenish-red light. It darted to and fro for an instant, almost vertically in the air, and Mercer heard the crackle of the treetops as they burst into flame under its heat. Then it swung downward, but before it could reach the water level, the rise of ground at the bank cut it off. Without realizing it, Mercer had been holding his breath as he watched. Now he let it out with a long sigh of relief. "We did it, Alina, we did it," he said exultantly. "And we've got a light ray, too." A moment later they swept around a bend in the river, out of sight and out of hearing of their enemies. Chapter 23. The storm. On the little stern seat of the boat, Mercer and Anina sat side by side, the girl steering by a small tiller that lay between them. They were well out in the middle of the river now, speeding silently along with its swift current. They made extraordinary speed. Both banks of the river were visible in the twilight, dim, wooded hills stretching back into darkness. The stream widened steadily as they advanced, until near its mouth it had become a broad estuary. They followed its right shore now and soon were out in the narrow sea. "We'd better go right on across," said Mercer. "It's too early for Alan to be at the end of the trail. He won't be there till tonight. We can reach the great city before he starts." They decided to do that, and headed straight out into the sea. They had been cold, sitting there in the wind, and wet to the skin. But the boat contained several furry jackets, which the men had left in it, and in the bottom, near the stern, a cubical metal box which lighted up like an electric radiator. By this they had dried and warmed themselves, and now, each with a fur jacket on, they felt thoroughly comfortable. Mercer was elated at what they had accomplished. He could see now how fortunate a circumstance it was that we had set the men free. He would not have stumbled upon this other party, and the invasion of the light country would have begun, had we not released them. He talked enthusiastically about what we were to do next, and Anina listened, saying very little, but following his words with eager attention. Once he thought she was more interested in the words themselves than in what he was saying, and said so. "Your language, so very easy it is. I want to learn it soon if I can." "Why, you know it already," he protested. "And how the deuce you ever got it so quickly beats me." She smiled. "When you say words, very easy then for me to remember. Not many words in spoken language." He shook his head. "Well, however you do it, the result's all right. I'm mighty glad, too. Why, when I get you back home on Earth—" He stopped in sudden confusion. She put her hand on his arm. "Mila says your Earth is very wonderful. Tell me about it." She listened to his glowing words. "And opera, what is that?" she asked once when he paused. He described the Metropolitan Opera House, and the newer, finer one in Boston. She listened to his description of the music with flushed face and shining eyes. How beautiful, that music. Can you sing, Ollie? No, he admitted, but I can play a little on a guitar. I wish I had one here. Can sing, said the girl. Mila says I can sing very well. He leaned toward her, brushing the blue feathers of her wing lightly with his hand. Sing for me, he said softly. I'll bet you sing beautifully. It may have been their situation, or what they had been through together, or the girl's nearness to him now with her long braids of golden hair, the graceful sweep of her blue-feathered wings that matched the blue of her eyes, her red lips parted in song, but whatever it was, Mercer thought he had never heard so sweet a voice. She sang a weird little song. It was in a minor key, with curious cadences that died away and ended nowhere, the folk song of a different race, a different planet, yet vibrant with the ever-unsatisfied longing of the human soul. She sang softly, staring straight before her, without thought of her singing, thinking only of her song. She ended with a tender phrase that might have been a sigh, a quivering little half-sob that died away in her throat and left the song unfinished. Her hands were folded quiet in her lap, her eyes gazed out on the grey waste of water about the boat. Mercer breathed again. That is beautiful, Anina. What is it? She turned to him and smiled. Just love song. You like it, my friend Ollie? It's wonderful. But it's so sad, and sort of weird, isn't it? That is love, my mother says. Love is sad. Mercer's heart was beating fast. Is it always sad, Alina? I don't think so, do you? There was no trace of coquetry in her eyes, she sighed tremulously. Do not know about love. But what I feel, put her hand on her breast, I do not understand, Ollie. And when I sing, they are very sad and sweet, the thoughts of music, and they say things to the heart that the brain does not understand. Is it that way with you? Unnoticed by the two, a storm cloud had swept up over the horizon behind them, and the sky overhead was blotted now with its black. They had not seen it nor heeded the distant flashing of lightning. A sudden thunderclap startled them now into consciousness of the scene about them. The wind rushed on them from behind. The sea was rising rapidly, the boat scudded before it. A storm. Look at it, Anina, behind us. There was nothing in sight now but the grey sea, broken into waves that were beginning to curl, white and angry. Behind them the darkness was split with jagged forks of lightning. The thunder rolled heavily and ominously in the distance, with occasional sharp cracks near at hand. Look, Alina, there comes the rain. See it there behind us. I hope it won't be a bad storm. I wouldn't want to be out in this little tub. The wind veered to the left, increasing steadily. The sea was lashed into foam, its spray swept over the boat, drenching them thoroughly. The waves, turning now with the wind, struck the boat on its stern quarter. One curled aboard, sloshing an inch or two of water about the bottom of the boat. Mercer feared it would interfere with the mechanism, but Anina reassured him. As the waves increased in size, Mercer swung the boat around so as to run directly before them. The stern frequently was lifted clear of the water now, the boat losing headway as a great cloud of hissing steam arose from behind. After a time the light country shore came into sight. They were close upon it before they saw it through the rain and murk. They seemed to be heading diagonally toward it. Where are we, Anina? Mercer asked anxiously. The girl shook her head. Steadily they were swept inward. The shoreline, as they drew closer, was to Mercer quite unfamiliar. There were no bayous here, no inundated land. Instead, a bleak line of cliffs fronted them, a perpendicular wall against which the waves beat furiously. They could see only a short distance. The line of cliffs extended ahead of them out of sight in the grey of the sheets of rain. They were slanting toward the cliffs, and Mercer knew if he did not do something they would be driven against them in a few moments more. We'll have to turn out, Alina. We can't land along here. We must keep away if we can. With the waves striking its stern quarter again, the boat made much heavier weather. It seemed to Mercer incredible that it should stay afloat. He found himself thoroughly frightened now, but when he remembered that Alina was in no danger he felt relieved. He had made her lie down in the boat, where she would be more sheltered from the wind and rain. Now he hastily bade her get up and sit beside him. We might be swamped any minute, Anina. You sit there where you won't get caught if we go over. They swept onward, Mercer keeping the boat offshore as best he could. Haven't you any idea where we are, Anina? How far along do these cliffs extend? A huge, jagged pinnacle of rock, like a great cathedral spire set in the cliff, loomed into view ahead. Alina's face brightened when she saw it. The way to the water city, she cried. A river there is, ahead. Not so very far now. In spite of all Mercer could do, they were blowing steadily closer to the wave-lashed cliffs. He began to despair. If anything happens, Alina, you fly up at once. You hear? Don't you wait. You can't help me any. I'll make out some way. You say goodbye to Alan and your mother and sister. For he fell silent a moment, then said softly, and, Anina, if that should happen, I want you to know that I think you're the sweetest, most wonderful little girl I ever met. And, Anina dear, the girl gripped his arm with a cry of joy. See, Ollie. There, ahead, the cliff's end. That is the Water City River. See it there. The mouth of a broad estuary, with the waves rolling up into it, came swiftly into view. They rounded the rocky headland and entered it, running now almost directly before the wind. The river narrowed after a short distance to a stream very much like the one they had left in the twilight country. Mercer turned to the quiet little girl beside him. Well, Alina, we've certainly had some trip. I wouldn't want to go through it again. Mercer thought the situation over. They could stay where they were in the river for an hour or two until the storm was entirely over, and then go back to the great city. On the other hand, now that they were here, Mercer felt a great curiosity to see this other city where Dow's men had created trouble. Why should they not use these few hours of waiting to see it? We might get a line on how things stand up there to tell Alan when we get back, Mercer said when he explained his ideas to Anina. It won't take long. Very probably it was the light ray cylinder in his hand which influenced his decision, for he added, we can't get into any trouble, you know, there's no light ray here yet. And so they went on. There was a perceptible current coming down the river. The water was cold and clear, and in the brighter light now he could see down into it in many places to the bottom, 6 or 8 feet below. The region seemed utterly uninhabited, no sign of a house or even a boat on the river met them as they advanced. Mightn't there be boats along here? Mercer asked once. How far up is this place? Not far now, beyond there. The river appeared to terminate abruptly up ahead against the side of a frowning brown cliff, but Mercer saw a moment later that it opened out around a bend to the left. Around that next bend? She nodded. It seemed incredible to Mercer that the second largest city in Mercury lay hidden in the midst of this desolation. We'll meet boats, he said. What will the people think of me? Don't let's start anything if we can help it. You lie there. Anina indicated the bottom of the boat at her feet. No one see you then? I steer. They do not notice me. Nobody care who I am. Mercer had still the very vaguest of ideas as to what they would do when they got to the Water City. As a matter of fact, he really was more curious just to see it than anything else. But there was another reason that urged him on. Both he and Anina were hungry. They had eaten very little since leaving the great city the night before, and now that it was again evening, they were famished. They had damaged the boat thoroughly, but evidently the men had taken all their supplies ashore with them, for nothing was in the boat. "We'll have to dope out some way to get something to eat," said Mercer. They came upon the sharp bend in the river Anina had indicated. Following close against one rocky shore, they swept around the bend, and the water city lay spread out before Mercer's astonished eyes. Chapter 24. The water city. It had stopped raining, the sky overhead was luminous with diffused sunlight, the scene that lay before Mercer was plainly visible. The river had opened abruptly into a broad, shallow, nearly circular lake, some 5 or 6 miles across. The country here showed an extraordinary change from that they had passed through. The lake appeared to occupy a depression in the surrounding hills, like the bottom of a huge, shallow bowl. From the water's edge on all sides the ground sloped upward. It was no longer a barren, rocky land, but seemingly covered with a rich heavy soil, dotted with tropical trees. That it was under a high state of cultivation was evident. Mercer saw tier upon tier of rice terraces on the hillsides. But what astonished him most was the city itself. It covered almost the entire surface of the lake, a huge collection of little palm-thatched shacks built upon platforms raised above the water on stilts. Some of the houses were larger and built of stone, with their foundations in the water. Off to one side were 2 or 3 little islands, an acre or less in extent, fringed with palms and coconut trees. In nearly the center of the lake stood a stone castle, 2 stories in height, with minarets ornamenting its corners. An open stretch of water surrounded it. There was little of regularity about this extraordinary city, and no evidence of streets, for the houses were set down quite haphazard wherever open space afforded. In some places they were more crowded together than others, although seldom closer than 20 or 30 feet. Around the larger ones there was a little more open water, as though the owners controlled it and forbade building there. Some of the smaller houses were connected by little wooden bridges. Alina said this was where 2 or more families of relatives had located together. There were a few boats moving about, little punts hollowed out of logs and propelled by long poles, and Mercer saw many others, some oft hem larger like the one he and Anina were in, tied up by the houses. It was now the time of the evening meal. The workers had returned from the terraces, there were few moving about the city. Occasionally a girl would dart up from one of the houses and wing her way to another, but beyond that there were no signs of activity. Alina took command of the boat now, slowing it down and heading for the nearest of the houses, which were hardly more than 1/4 of a mile away. Mercer stretched himself out in the bottom of the boat, covering himself with a large piece of fabric that lay there. He felt that he would be unnoticed, even should a girl chance to pass directly overhead. But he could see nothing of the city from where he was, and soon grew restless and anxious to do something else. "I'm coming up, Anina," he said once. "Shucks. Nobody can do anything to us. Haven't I got this light ray?" But Alina was obdurate, and made him stay where he was. They went slowly forward and were soon among the houses. On the front platform of one a man sat fishing. A little naked boy slid down into the water from another, swimming as though born to the water. Both stared at Alina curiously as she passed slowly by, but they said nothing. A girl looked out of the window of another house and waved her hand in friendly greeting, which Anina answered. Mercer, lying with all but his face covered by the cloth, could see only the sides of the boat, the bottom of the cross seat over his head, and Anina as she sat above him in the stern. "Where do you suppose the Dao people hang out around here?" he suddenly asked. "If we could," the girl silenced him with a gesture. He lowered his voice. "Try and find out where they are, Alina," he whispered. Alina steered the boat directly under several of the houses, which must have been quite a usual proceeding, for it attracted no attention. A girl flew close to them once, and Anina called to her. The girl alighted on the stern of the boat for a moment. Mercer slid the cloth over his face and held himself motionless. Then he heard Anina's voice calling to him softly. He slid the cloth back. The girl had gone. "She says Dao's men live There, large house, of wood, said Anina, pointing off to one side. Mercer nearly rapped his head against the seat above him in his excitement. You know which house? Let's go there. Maybe we can hear what they are saying. Can we get under it? She nodded. Let's try, Anina, he said eagerly. You steer us slow right under it, just as if you were going past. If there's nobody in sight you can stop underneath, can't you? Maybe we can hear what they are saying. I'll try, the girl said simply. I'll lay still, encouraged Mercer. Nobody will bother about you. Just sneak in and see what happens. If anybody sees you, keep going. He was all excitement, and in spite of Anina's protests wriggled about continually, trying to see where they were. The house that the girl had pointed out lay only a few hundred yards ahead. It was one of the largest of the wooden buildings, 60 or 70 feet long at least, single-story, with a high sloping thatched roof. It was raised on a platform some 6 feet above the water, which, in front, had a little flight of wooden steps leading down to the surface. There was 100 feet of open water on all sides of the building. The boat, moving slowly, slipped through the water almost without a sound. Where are we now? Mercer whispered impatiently. Aren't we there? The girl put a finger to her lips. Almost there. Quiet now. She steered straight for the house. There was no one in sight, either about the house itself or about those in its immediate vicinity. A moment more and the boat slid beneath the building into semi-darkness. Alina shut the power off and stood up. The floor of the house was just above her head. In front of her, near the center of the building, she saw the side walls of an inner enclosure some 20 feet square. These walls came down to the surface, making a room like a basement to the dwelling. A broad doorway, with a sliding door that now stood open, gave ingress. The boat had now almost lost headway. Anina nosed its bow into this doorway, and grasping one of the pilings near at hand, brought it to rest. Mercer, at a signal from her, climbed cautiously to his feet, still holding the little light ray cylinder in his hand. What's that in there? He whispered. Beyond the doorway, through which the bow of the boat projected, there was complete darkness. Lower room, Anina whispered back. Store things in there. And boat landing, too. Let's go in and see. Mercer started toward the bow of the boat. 6 feet or more of it was inside the doorway. He made his way carefully into the bow, and found himself inside the basement of the house. In the dimness of this interior he could just make out the outlines of things around. The doorway was located at a corner of the enclosure. In front lay a small open space of water. At one side a platform about 2 feet above the surface formed the floor of the room. A tiny punt lay moored to it. Farther back a small, steep flight of steps led up through a rectangular opening to the building above. Most of the light in this lower room came down through this opening, and now, as Mercer stood quiet looking about him, he could hear plainly the voices of men in the room above. Anina was beside him. They are up there, he whispered, pointing. Let's land and see if we can get up those stairs a ways and hear what they are saying. They stood a moment, undecided, and then from the silence and darkness about them they distinctly heard a low muffled sound. What's that? Whispered Mercer, startled. Didn't you hear that, Alina? There's something over there by the bottom of the steps. They listened, but only the murmur of the voices from above, and an occasional footstep, broke the stillness. Tell you I heard something, Mercer persisted. There's something over there. He rattled a bit of rope incautiously, as if to startle a rat from its hiding place. Let's tie up, Alina. They made the boat fast, but in such a way that they could cast it loose quickly. We might want to get out of here in a hurry, Mercer whispered with a grin. You never can tell, Alina. He stood stock still. The sound near at hand was repeated. It was unmistakable this time, a low, stifled moan. Mercer stepped lightly out of the boat onto the platform. A few boxes, a coil of rope, and other odds and ends stood about. He felt his way forward among them toward the bottom of the steps. He heard the moan again, and now he saw the outlines of a human figure lying against the farther wall. Anina was close behind him. "There's somebody over there," he whispered. "Hurt or sick, maybe." They crept forward. It was a woman, bound hand and foot and gagged. Mercer bent over and tore the cloth from her face. In another instant Anina was upon her knees, sobbing softly, with her mother's head in her lap. They loosed the cords that held her, and chafed her stiffened limbs. She soon recovered, for she was not injured. She told Alina her story then, how Bara had captured her in her home while she was waiting for Mila and me, and how 2 of his men had brought her here to the water city by boat at once. That was all she knew, except that this house was the headquarters of Dao's emissaries, who, it appeared, were now allied with Bara and his party. Anina whispered all this to Mercer when her mother had finished. "Let's get out of here," said Mercer. The responsibility of 2 women, especially the elder Lua, who could not fly, weighed suddenly upon him, and his first thought was to get back to the great city at once. Alina helped her mother into the boat. "Wait," she whispered to Mercer. "Hear what they say. You wait here." She went to the foot of the steps and began climbing them cautiously. "Not on your life, I won't wait here," Mercer muttered to himself, and, gripping the light ray cylinder firmly as though he feared it might get away from him, he joined Anina on the stairway. Slowly, cautiously they made their way upward. The steps were fairly wide, and they went up almost side by side. From near the top they could see a portion of the room above. The corner of a table showed, around which a number of men were gathered, eating. A woman was moving about the room serving them. Their words, from here, were plainly audible. Mercer would have gone a step or 2 higher, without thought of discovery, but Anina held him back. "Wait, Ollie. I hear now what they say." They stood silent. The men were talking earnestly. Mercer could hear their words, but of course understood nothing he heard. "What do they say, Anina?" he whispered impatiently after a moment. "Bar is here with 2 or 3 of his men. He talks with Dao's men. They talk about men from Twilight Country. Waiting for them now. Speak of storm. Worried, because men do not come. Waiting for Light Ray. They'll have a long wait," Mercer chuckled. "Let's get out of here, Anina." He must have made a slight noise, or perhaps he and Anina, crouching there on the stairs, were seen by someone above. He never knew quite how it occurred, but, without warning, a man stood at the opening, looking down at them. There was a shout, and the room above was in instant turmoil. Mercer lost his head. Anina pulled at him and said something, but he did not hear her. He only knew that they had been discovered, and that most of their enemies in the water city were crowded together in this one room at hand. And he had the light ray, the only one in the city. A sudden madness possessed him. He tore away from Anina and, climbing up the steps of the stairway, leaped into the room above. 20 or 30 men faced him, most of them about the table. Several had started hastily to their feet, 2 or 3 chairs were overturned. The man who had been looking down into the opening darted back as Mercer came up, and shouted again. Mercer saw it was Bara. Image 6, the Water City. The men around the table were now all on their feet. One of them picked up a huge metal goblet and flung it at Mercer's head. The last remaining bit of reason Mercer had left fled from him. Without thought of what he was about, he raised the metal cylinder, his thumb found the little button and pressed it hard, he waved the cylinder back and from before him. It was over in an instant. Mercer relaxed his pressure on the button and staggered back. He was sick and faint from what he had seen, with the realization of what he had done. Flames were rising all about him. The room was full of smoke. He held his breath, finding his way back somehow to the stairway, with the agonized screams of the men ringing in his ears. He caught a glimpse of Alina's white face as she stood there where he had left her. Good God! Alina! Go back! Go back! I'm coming! He tripped near the top of the stairs and fell in a heap onto the platform below, but he still held the cylinder clutched tightly in his hand. Alina groped her way down to him. He gripped her by the arm. He was trembling like a leaf. The crackling of the burning house above came down to him, the cries of the men were stilled. Come, Alina, he half whispered. Hurry, let's get away, anywhere. Home, out of this cursed city. Lua was still in the boat. Her calm, steady glance brought Mercer back to his senses. They shoved the boat out from under the house, and in a moment more were heading back through the city. The building they had left was now a mass of flames, with a great cloud of smoke rolling up from it. A woman stood on the front platform an instant, and then, screaming, flung herself into the water. The city was in commotion. Faces appeared at windows, girls flew up and gathered in a frightened flock, circling about the burning building, boats miraculously appeared from everywhere. Lua was steering their boat on its tortuous way between the houses. She put the boat nearly to full speed, and as they swept past a house nearly collided with a punt that was crossing behind it. Mercer's nerves were still shaken. He handed Alina the light ray cylinder. Here, take it, Anina. I don't want the cursed thing. Shoot it up into the air. Somebody might try and stop us. That'll scare them. Careful you don't hit anything. Alina played the light about in the air for a time, but soon there were so many girls flying about she had to shut it off. A few minutes more and they had passed the last of the houses, swept around the bend in the river, and left the frightened city out of sight behind them. They had left the river and, following close along shore, headed for the bayous that led up to the great city. The storm had now entirely passed, leaving the daylight unusually bright and a fresh coolness in the air. The sea was still rough, although not alarmingly so, and the boat made comparatively slow progress. It was 2 hours or more, to Mercer it seemed a whole day, before they were nearing the bayous. Alina was sitting by his side in the center of the boat. Lua was steering. You hungry, Ollie? The girl asked, smiling. Mercer shook his head. He had forgotten they had intended to eat in the water city. Very hungry. Soon she stopped abruptly, staring up into the sky ahead of them. Mercer followed her glance. A little black blob showed against the grey, off to one side 2 other smaller black dots appeared. What's that? Cried Mercer, alarmed. They watched a few moments in silence. Then Mercer took the cylinder, and flashed its light into the air. If it's anybody connected with Dow, that'll show they'd better keep away, he explained grimly. Alina smiled. Dow people cannot fly, Ollie. A few moments more and they saw what it was. And within 10 minutes they had landed at the mouth of one of the bayous, and Mila and I were with them. Chapter 25. Preparations for war. The months that followed were the busiest, I think, of my life. I began by a complete reorganization of this government of which I found myself the head. For the doddering old councillors of the late king I substituted men whom I selected from among those of the city's prominent businessmen who cared to serve. The personnel of the police force I allowed to remain, for I soon saw they were inclined to act very differently under me than under my predecessor. The various other officials of this somewhat vague organization I subjected to a thorough weeding out. The net result was chaos for a time, but, far more quickly than I had anticipated, I had things running again. I made no radical changes except in personnel. I attempted to do nothing that was outside the then existing laws, and no new laws were passed. But from the very first I made it clear that I was not one to be trifled with. Within a few days after I was put into power, I interviewed Fuuro and his scientific confreres. I found them a body of grave men who represented the highest type of the nation. They made it plain to me at once that they would not concern themselves in any way with government affairs. 2 years before they had recognized Tao's menace, and had been preparing for it by the manufacture of large quantities of war material which, in case of extreme necessity, they would turn over to the government. This armament, as Mila had told me, they guarded themselves, not trusting it even to their workmen. The scientific men, I understood now, were among the richest in the nation, owing to the widespread use of their industrial appliances. It was only a portion of this wealth that they were expending in the manufacture of armament. I demanded the release to me of this war material. I explained them my plans, and told them in detail of Tao's visit to Earth. They held several conferences over a period of 2 or 3 days, but in the end I got what I asked for. So much for affairs in the great city. I recognized during these days the possibility of an armed invasion from the Twilight Country. I was better prepared to meet it now, should it come, and I at once took steps to be warned as far in advance as possible. To this end I had girls patrolling the narrow sea, not only on our shore, but over in the Twilight Country as well, and I was satisfied that if Tao made any move we would be notified at once. Simultaneously with all this, we devoted ourselves to the unification of the nation, for in very truth it seemed about to disintegrate. Here it was that the girls were of the greatest assistance. We organized them into an army which consisted of 50 squads of 10 girls each, with a leader for each squad. All of these girls were armed with the light ray cylinders. With this flying army Mercer and I made a tour of the light country cities. We wasted no time with formalities, but rounded up Tao's men wherever we could find them, and transported them unceremoniously back to the Twilight Country shore. In 2 or 3 of the cities, the Water City particularly, there was a show of rebellion among the people, but our light rays cowed them instantly, and in no instance did we have to kill or injure anyone. Through Mila I made speeches everywhere. It was not my wish to hold the country in sullen subjection, and to that end I appealed to their patriotism in this coming war against Tao and the Twilight people. This aspect of the matter met with ready response, and everywhere our meetings ended in enthusiastic acclaim. We started now to raise an army of young men, which we proposed to transport across the narrow sea for land operations in the Twilight Country. Before a week had passed I saw, by the response that came from my various proclamations, that conscription would be unnecessary. With this tangible evidence of the coming war the patriotism of the people grew by leaps and bounds. The fact that the girls of the great city were not only in favor of it, but were actually already in service, a thing unprecedented in the Hist 01Y of the nation, brought the sympathies of all the women with us strongly. Through the governors of each city I raised a separate army of young men, officered by the older men, most of whom had taken part in past fighting. Each of these little armies, as yet without arms, was drilled and held in readiness for orders from the great city. I had, during all this time, selected as many able men as possible from among the great city's population, and given them over to Fuuro and his associates for training in the use of the light ray rockets, the larger projectors, protective measures against the ray, and many other appliances which I understood only vaguely myself. It was after our return from the tour of the different cities, and before the recruiting of the young men was fairly underway, when like a bombshell came the news from our flying patrol that a fleet of armed boats was coming down the river from the lone city. The attack from Tao was at hand, and our preparations were still far from complete. We had our army of girls in active operation, and that was all. Tao's boats would reach the light country shore in a few hours. There was no time for anything but the hastiest of preparations. We decided then to call the army of girls and meet the boats in the narrow sea, turning them back if possible. I have now to explain the method of defense against the light ray. In theory I only vaguely understood it. In practice it was simple and, like most defenses, only partially effective. Bob Trevor has already mentioned it, the suits of black cloth he saw in the Mercutian camp in Wyoming. It was not, as he had afterward supposed, a dye for fabrics. Instead, it was the thread of a one, like our silk worm, which in its natural state was black and was impervious to the ray. By that I mean a substance whose molecules increased their vibration rate only slightly from a brief contact with the ray. It was only panly efficacious, for after an exposure of a minute or more the intense heat of the ray was communicated. It then became partly penetrable, and anything close behind it would be destroyed. We had under manufacture at this time a number of protective devices by which this substance might be used. Boats had, in the past, been equipped with a sort of shield or hood in front, making them more or less impervious to a direct horizontal beam of the light. Dow's boats which now threatened us were so protected, I was informed by the girls who reported them. Recognizing the probability of an attack by us from the air, they also had a covering of the cloth, like a canopy above them. But as may be readily understood, such protection could be made only partly effective. I had already manufactured, at Mila's suggestion, a number of shields for our girls to carry while in flight. These consisted of the fabric in very light, almost diaphanous, form, hung upon a flexible frame of very thin strips of bamboo. It was some 12 feet broad across the top, narrowing rapidly into a long fluttering tail like a kite. There was nothing rigid about this shield. Its 2 or 3 bamboo ribs were as flexible as a whip, with the veiling, it was hardly more than that, fluttering below them almost entirely unsupported. In weight, the whole approximated 1/12 that of a girl, not at all a difficult amount to carry. Within 2 hours after the report came, it was near midday, we were ready to start from the great city to repel Dow's attack. Our forces consisted of some 600 girls, each armed with a light ray cylinder and a shield. This was the organization I have already mentioned, 50 squads of 10, each with a leader, and 50 other girls, the most daring and expert in the air, who were to act independently. We had 2 platforms, protected by the fabric, and with a sort of canopy around the sides underneath, over which the girls grasping the handles could fly. Mercer and Anina rode on one platform, and Mila and I on the other. All of us were dressed in the black garments. On each of the platforms we had mounted a projector of higher power than the hand cylinders, although of course of much less effective range than those the Mercutians had used in Wyoming. Thus equipped we rose into the air from the castle grounds in the great city, with a silent, awed multitude watching us, as strange an army, probably, as ever went forth to battle. Chapter 26. The Battle. We swept out over the great city, flying in the battle formation we had used many times before on our trips about the country. Mercer's platform and mine were some 50 feet apart, leading. Behind us, in a great semicircle, the girls spread out, 50 little groups of 10, each with its single leader in front. Below, 100 feet perhaps, the 50 other girls darted back and forth, keeping pace with us. The aspect of these girls, flying thus to battle, was truly extraordinary. The pink-white flesh of their bodies, their limbs encased in the black veiling, their long black or golden hair, and the vivid red or blue feathered wings flashing behind those wide, fluttering, flimsy black shields, it was a sight the like of which I never shall see again. There was almost no wind, for which I was thankful, as it made our maneuvers in the air considerably less difficult. When we reached the narrow sea our patrols reported that Dow's ships were still in the river, waiting for others from the lone city to join them. We hastened on, for I wished to meet them as near the twilight shore as possible. We believed, from the reports our girls had brought us, that the enemy would have some 20 or 30 boats, most of them similar to that in which Mercer and Anina weathered the storm on the way to the water city. We assumed that the men in the boats would be armed with the hand light ray cylinders. These projected a beam not over 4 inches broad and had an effective range of about 500 feet. The boats probably would carry large projectors also. They might be set up in the boats ready for use, or they might not. What range they would have we could not estimate, though we hoped we should encounter nothing more powerful than this one Mila and I had on the platform. Its beam was about 20 inches wide, its effective radius something like 1,000 feet. We did not expect to encounter the very large projectors. We had some in the great city with a range of something like 10 miles, and others of lesser range that spread the ray out fan shape. But these were extremely heavy, and we were confident it would not be practical to mount them in the boats. We sighted the enemy in the narrow sea just before the twilight shore was reached. The first intimation we had was the sight of one of the narrow beams of red-green light flashing about in the twilight. As we crept closer, at an altitude of some 2,000 feet, we saw the dim outlines of the boats in the water below. There were, I made out, some 10 or 15 in sight. They were heading out into the sea in single file. Mila and I had carefully discussed the tactics we were to employ. Mercer understood our plans, and we had 3 or 4 girls detailed to fly close to the platforms and carry our orders about to the leaders of the various little squads. We sighted the boats when we were about a mile away, and, as I have said, at an altitude of some 2,000 feet. They must have seen us soon afterward, for many light rays now began flashing up from them. So far as I could determine, each boat seemed armed only with one mounted projector. These I believed to be of somewhat similar power to our own. Our first move was to poise directly over the enemy, rising to an altitude of 2,500 feet. The boats kept straight on their way, and we followed them, circling overhead in lengthening spirals, but keeping well out of range. I had ordered that none of the rays be flashed at this time, and it must have been difficult for the men in the boats below to see us in the dusk, shrouded as we were in black. They sent up a rocket once, it mounted above us in a slow flaming arc, hung poised an instant, and then descended, plunging into the sea a mile or so away. We heard distinctly the hiss of its contact with the water, and saw, like a quickly dissipating mist, the cloud of steam that arose. We were not armed with these rockets, for to discharge them from the platforms would have been impractical. But we did not fear them being used against us. Even if aim had been possible, we could easily avoid their slow flight. The protecting canopy below the sides of our platform made it difficult to see what was going on below us. Mila and I lay prone, with our heads projecting over its forward end. In this position we had an unobstructed, though somewhat limited, view. The girls carrying us could see nothing. They were guided by watching the other girls flying near them, and by Mila's constant directions. For some 10 or 15 minutes we circled about over the leading boat. The twilight shore was now almost over the horizon. The boats showed as little black patches on the grey-black of the sea, but the lights flashing up from them were plainly visible. The boat that led the line was quite perceptibly drawing away from the others. Already it was 1,000 feet or more ahead of the nearest one following. We waited through another period. This leading boat was now beyond range of the others, and, being isolated, I decided to attack it. I said, "Tell them all to maintain this level. You and I will go down at that first boat. Have them all remain up here. Tell Mercer if anything goes wrong with us to act as he thinks best." We waited while these commands were circulated about. Mercer's platform swept close over us, and he shouted, "We won't stay up here." I persuaded him finally, and then we directed our girls to circle slowly downward with our platform. I ordered a slow descent, for I was in no mind to rush blindly into range of their ray. We drooped down in a spiral, until at about 1,500 feet I ordered the girls to descend no farther. So far as I could make out now, this boat was protected from above by a broad overhanging canopy. Its sides evidently were open, or nearly so, for we could see now the smaller rays flashing out horizontally. The large projector was mounted in the bow beyond the canopy. Its beam obviously could be directed into the air, for it was now swinging up toward us. But in the horizontal position its range was limited to an arc in front of the boat. I saw then that our play was to attack from a low level, since only in that way could we expect to reach a vulnerable spot in the boat's armor. And I believed that if we could keep behind it they could not reach us with their larger projector. We swooped downward almost to the water level, and reached it 1,000 feet perhaps off to one side of the boat and partly behind it. The smaller projectors flashed out at us, but we were beyond their range. The projector in the bow swung back and forth, and as we skimmed the surface of the water, heading toward the boat, it turned to face us. What followed happened so quickly I had no time to consult with Mila. She directed our flight. I turned the current into our projector and tried to bring its beam to bear on the boat. We approached within some 800 feet of it, darting back and forth, sometimes rising 100 feet or more, sometimes skimming the surface, but always keeping behind the boat as it turned in an endeavor to face us. My light ray beam hit the water frequently, with a great boiling and hissing, sending up clouds of steam that for a moment obscured the scene. Once or twice our opponent's beam flashed over us, but we were beyond its arc before they could bring it directly to bear. I grew confused at the rapid turns we made. The dark outlines of the boat, with its 20 or 30 flashing red and green lights, seemed everywhere at once. I swung my projector about as best I could, but the swiftly shifting target seemed too elusive. Once, as we dropped suddenly downward, I thought we should plunge into the hissing, roaring water below. Again, the opposing ray swung directly under us, as we darted upward to avoid it. "Can't make it, Mila," I said. "Hold steady toward them if you can." She did not answer, but kept her face over the platform's end and issued her swift directions to the girls. Once, as we tilted sharply upward, I caught a glimpse of a black shape sweeping past, overhead. It was Mercer's platform, flying unswervingly toward the boat, its red-green beam steady before it like a locomotive headlight. We turned to follow, my own light swung dangerously near Mercer, and I turned the current off hastily. The wind of our fanfare flight whistled past my ears, Mila's directions to the girls rose shrill above it. I caught a glimpse of the darting lights of the boat ahead. Then, when we were hardly more than 600 feet away, Mercer's light picked it up. I saw the little lurid red circle it made as it struck the boat's canopy top, and roved along it end to end. Mercer's platform darted lower, and from that angle his light swept under the canopy. A man's scream of agony came to us across the water. The lights on the boat were extinguished, only the yellow glare of the flames rising from its interior fittings remained. Then, a moment later, the boat's stern rose into the air, and it slid hissing into the water, leaving only a little wreckage and a few struggling forms on the swirling surface. We swung sharply upward. Again Mercer's platform, its light now extinguished, swept directly over us. His exultant voice floated down. "We did it, Alan. We did it. Come on up." We rose to the upper air, where the girls were still circling about. The other boats were keeping on their course, spreading farther apart now to be out of range of each other's projectors. I had hoped they would turn back with this catastrophe to their leader, but they did not. I consulted hastily with Mila, and then we gave the order for a general attack, allowing each of the leading girls to act as she saw fit. Like a great flock of birds we swooped downward upon our prey, spreading out to attack all the boats at once. The girls now turned on their hand lights, a myriad tiny beams darting about in the semi-darkness. I cannot attempt to describe the scene that followed. It can be imagined, perhaps, but not told in words. As we swept within range of the lights that swung up from below to meet us, I saw a girl, flying alone, pass directly through one of the red beams. It seemed to strike her sidewise. In an instant she had passed beyond it. I saw the dim outlines of her form as she fluttered onward, wavering and aimless like a wounded bird. And then she fell, turning over and over as with one wing she strove vainly to support herself, until at last, wrapped in the sable shroud of her shield, she plunged with a great splash into the sea. The flashing light rays all about us now seemed mingled in inextricable confusion. The girls must have passed through them frequently, protected by their shields, and I know our platform was several times struck by them from below. The absence of sound was uncanny. Only the whistling wind of our flight, the flapping of the girls' wings, and the hissing of steam as our rays struck the water, accompanied this inferno of light. We swept beyond the boat we had singled out, passing 500 or 600 feet above it, and in the effort to avoid its ray turning so that I was unable to bring mine upon it. As we rose again, beyond it, I saw a boat off to the left in flames. A dozen girls had rushed upon it, darting in among its smaller rays to where their own would be effective. But there was only one girl above it now, struggling brokenly to maintain herself in flight. The boat sank with the roar of an explosion of some kind, but in the sudden darkness about I could still see this lone wounded girl fluttering onward. We were not far away. I pointed her out to Mila, and instead of swinging back we kept on toward her. We contrived to pass close under her, and she fell abruptly almost into my arms. I stretched her out gently on the platform and turned back to Mila, who was kneeling behind our projector. We were now nearly half a mile from the nearest of the boats. Several of them evidently had been sunk, and 2 or 3 others were sinking. One I could make out heading back for the twilight shore. Above it the lights of our girls following showed vivid against the dark grey sky. Where Mercer's platform was I could not tell. Mila gripped my shoulder. "See, Alan, there." She pointed off to one side. "One of the boats tries to escape." We were now some 500 feet above the water. Half a mile beyond us, all its lights out, one of the boats was scurrying away, on across toward the light country. For some reason none of our girls seemed following it. Mila issued a sharp command. We swooped downward at lightning speed and, barely skimming the surface, flew after this escaping enemy. Whether its larger projector had been rendered inoperative, or many of its crew killed, or whether it thought merely to escape us and make a landing in the light country, I did not know. Whatever the reason, no lights showed from this boat as we drew after it. I had our own light out. When we came close within range I flashed it on suddenly. We were flying steadily, and I picked up the boat without difficulty, raking it through from stem to stem under its protecting canopy. I could see the canopy drop as its supporting metal framework fused in the heat of the ray. Flames rose from the interior wooden fittings. The boat's stern seemed to melt away as the thin metal was rendered molten. The water about it boiled under the heat. A cloud of steam then rose up, obscuring it completely from my sight. I switched off the light. We continued on, rising a little. The steam dissipated. Directly below us on the bubbling, swirling water a few twisted black forms bobbed about. We were so close now I could see them plainly. I looked away hastily. We swung back toward the twilight shore, rising sharply. There seemed now only one boat afloat. Far above it I saw a tiny black oblong that I knew was Mercer's platform. A swarm of other dots, with the tiny pencils of red light flashing from them, showed where the cloud of girls were swooping down to the attack. Now that we were out of the action, I had opportunity to watch what was going on more closely. This last engagement seemed to last less than a minute. The girls darted fearlessly downward among the rays that swung up from the boat. Scores of them were hit. I could see their forms illuminated for an instant by the lurid red and green light. Some passed through it safely, many fell. But those who got within range hit the boat without difficulty. Its lights went out suddenly and a moment later it sank. The girls' lights flashed off, and they rose again into the air, tiny black shapes circling about Mercer's platform. The scene now seemed suddenly very dark, peaceful and still. A great weight lifted from my heian, though it still remained heavy with what I had seen. I turned to Mila. Her face was white and drawn. "We have won, my girl," I said. She smiled wanly. "We have won? But, oh, Alan, that women should have to do such deeds." Her eyes shone with the light of a soul in sorrow. "Pray to your God now, my husband, that this war may be the last, for all time, in all the universe." Chapter 27. The Siege of the Lone City. Our losses totaled nearly 150 girls. We brought back with us on the platforms but 6 wounded. I shall never forget that hour we spent searching among the wreckage, those blackened, twisted forms of what had once been men and women. I shall not describe it. Of all the boats which Dow had dispatched on this ill-fated expedition, only one escaped to return with news of the disaster. I was glad now that one, at least, had survived, for the report it would give would, I felt sure, dissuade Dow from making any other similar attempt at invasion. Our broken little army made its way slowly back to the great city. We went, not in triumph, but indeed with all the aspect of defeat. The people received us in a frenzy of joy and gratitude to the girls for what they had done. This first battle took place, as I have said, just after we 4 had returned from our tour of the light country, and before the recruiting of the young men was fairly underway. To this recruiting it proved an extraordinary stimulus. The girls, having been in successful action, stirred the young men of the nation as probably nothing else could, and all over the country they came forward faster than they could be enrolled. It was 2 or 3 days after the battle that Mila came to me one morning with the wounded girl she and I had rescued in the air. "We have a plan, Sailor and I, my husband," she said. The girl seemed hardly more than a sweet little child, 15 or 16, perhaps. It gave me a shock now to realize that we had allowed her to go into such a combat. One of her blue feathered wings was bound in a cloth. Its lower portion, I could tell, had been burned away. "Never will she fly again," my husband said. "Mila, for she is one of those who has sacrificed her wings that we might all be safe from the invader." She then went on to explain that now, while this feeling of gratitude to the girls ran so high among the people, the time seemed propitious for changing the long-hated law regarding their wings. I had not thought of that, but agreed with her wholly. I called the people into the castle gardens that same night. Never had I seen such a gathering. We allowed fully 10,000 to come in, the rest we were forced to send away. Mila made a speech, telling them that in recognition of the girls' services in this war, I had decided to allow them henceforth to keep their wings unmutilated after marriage. We exhibited this little girl, Sailor, as one who had given her power of flight, not as a sacrifice on the altar of man's selfishness, but in the service of her country. Then Sailor herself made a speech, in her earnest little child voice, pleading for her sisters. When she ended, there may have been some unmarried men in our audience who were still against the measure, doubtless there were, but they were afraid or ashamed to let their feeling be known. When the meeting broke up, I had ample evidence of the people's wishes upon which to proceed. Within a week my Congress met, and the law was repealed. We informed the other cities of this action, and everywhere it was met with enthusiasm. Enlistment and war preparations went steadily on, but despite it all there were more marriages that next month, 3 times over, than in any before. I had now been in power some 3 months, and the time was approaching when we were ready to make our invasion of the Twilight Country. We had been maintaining a rigid aerial patrol of the narrow sea, but no further activities of the enemy had been threatened. The expedition, when it was ready, numbered about 1,000 young men, each armed with one of the hand-light ray cylinders, 50 officers, and about 50 older men in charge of the projectors and rockets, who, for want of a better term, I might call our artillery corps. There was also the organization of girls, and a miscellaneous corps of men to handle the boats, mechanics to set up the projectors, and a commissariat. The 1,000 young men represented those we had selected from the several thousand enlisted in the great city. All the rest, and the many thousands in the other cities, we were holding in reserve. We took with us, on this invading expedition, only small wheeled trucks, on which to convey the larger projectors, and storage tanks and other heavy apparatus, for the Lone City River ran directly to the point where we planned to conduct our siege. Some 40 large boats were required to carry the men, ammunition and supplies. Mercer and Elle, with Alina and Mila, travelled as before through the air on the 2 platforms with the girls. We crossed the narrow sea without incident and entered the river. Several hours up, the river narrowed and entered a rocky gorge, 400 or 500 feet wide and 1,000 feet deep, with almost perpendicular sides. Along one of these ran the Lone City Trail. We passed through this gorge. The river here flowed with a current that amounted almost to rapids. Our boats made slow progress. Finally we emerged into an even wilder country, almost devoid of trees. Here we made our first night's encampment. Noon of the next day found us approaching the Lone City. We did not need to surmise now that Dow would be warned, for far away on the horizon ahead we saw the beams from his great projectors mounting up into the blackness of the sky. Some 4 miles from the Lone City the river we were ascending swept off to the right. This was its closest point to the city, and here we disembarked. There were several docks and a few houses, but we found them all deserted. The Lone City was particularly well suited to defence, even though the lay of the country was such that we were enabled to approach here within 4 miles, and establish our base in comparative safety. The country was wild and rocky, with few trees. The riverbed lay in a cairn. From where Rue landed, a valley so deep and narrow, it might almost be termed a cairn, also led up to the city. This valley was some 2 miles wide, with a level floor, and precipitous, rocky sides towering in many places over 1,000 feet. Above it stretched a broken plateau country. The valley had many sharp bends and turns, as though in some distant past it had been the bed of a great river that had eroded its tortuous course through the rock. The Lone City lay shut in at the bottom of this valley between 2 of its bends. It was a settlement of perhaps 10,000 people, the only city in the Twilight Country, with one exception, on this hemisphere of Mercury. We established our field base here at the river, and I devoted the next few days to informing myself of the exact lay of the country, and the methods of defence of the city Dow had provided. I found this defence the height of simplicity, and for its purpose as effective as it well could be. A vertical barrage of light surrounded the city, extending upward into the air with the most powerful projectors some 10 or 15 miles, and, with those of the spreading rays, forming a solid wall of light at the lower altitudes. There were no projectors past the first turn in the valley toward the river, where they could have been directed horizontally, and none of them on the cliff tops above the city. Thus, although we could not get over this light barrage, we could approach it closely in many places. Dow's tactics became immediately evident. He had thrown an almost impregnable barrier close about him and, instinct to its protection, was making no effort to combat us for the moment with any moves of offence. My first endeavour was to find a position on top of the cliffs from which the city could be reached with a projector. It was practically the only thing to do. The city could not be approached in front from the valley floor, its entire surface beyond the turn was swept by the light rays. Approach from below in the rear was likewise barred. Had the barrage been not so high our girls might have flown over it and dropped bombs, or we might have sent rockets over it and dropped them into the city. Neither of these projects was practical. The girls could not fly over that barrage. It was too cold in the higher altitudes. Nor could we send rockets over, for rockets sent through the light were exploded before they could reach their mark. The projectors along the sides of the city were located for the most part 100 feet or more back from the base of the surrounding cliffs. This allowed them to cut the cliff face at the top. It will be understood then that we could approach the brink of the cliff in many places, but never sufficiently near to be able to direct our rays downward into the city. These cliffs were exceedingly jagged and broken. They overhung in many places. Great rifts split them, ravines wound their way down, many of these with small, stunted trees growing in them. A descent from the summit to the floor of the valley, had we been unimpeded by the light, would in many places not have been difficult. During the next week, we succeeded, working in the prevailing gloom, in establishing a projector at the mouth of a ravine which emerged at the cliff face hardly 100 feet from the valley bottom. This point was below the spreading light rays which swept the cliff top above. We mounted the projector without discovery, and, flashing it on suddenly, swept the valley with its rays. An opposing ray from below picked it out almost immediately, and destroyed it, killing 2 of our men. The irregularities of the cliffs made several other similar attempts possible. We took advantage of them, and in each case were able to rake the valley with our fire for a moment before our projector was located and destroyed. One, which we were at great pains to protect, was maintained for a somewhat longer period. I believed we had done an immense amount of damage by these momentarily active projectors, although our enemy gave no sign. We then tried dropping rockets at the base of the lights in the valley. There were few points at which they could be reached without striking the rays first. But we persisted, sending up 100 or more. Most were ineffective, a few found their mark, as we could tell by a sudden hole in the barrage, which, however, was invariably repaired before we could make it larger. These activities lasted a week or more. It began to look as though we had entered upon a lengthy siege. I wondered how long the city's food supply would last if we settled down to starve it out. The thought came to me then that Dow might be almost ready for his second expedition to the earth. Was he indeed merely standing us off in this way so that some day he might depart in his vehicle before our very eyes? Dow began to adopt our tactics. Without warning, one day a projector from a towering eminence near the city flashed down at the river encampment. That we were not entirely destroyed was due to the extreme watchfulness of our guards, who located it immediately with their rays. As it was, we lost nearly 100 men in the single moment it was in operation. We then withdrew our camp farther away down the river, to a point where the conformation of the country made a repetition of this attack impossible. A sort of guerrilla warfare now began in the mountains. Our scouting parties frequently met Dow's men, and many encounters, swiftly fatal to one side or the other, took place. But all the time we were able, at intervals, to rake the valley with our fire for brief periods. Mercer constantly was evolving plans of the utmost daring, most of them indeed amounting practically to suicide for those undertaking them. But I held him back. Our present tactics were dangerous enough, although after the first few fatalities we succeeded in protecting our men, even though our projectors were invariably destroyed. One of Mercer's plans we tried with some success. There were some places in the light barrage that were much less high than others. We devised a smaller rocket that could be fired from the platforms. Mercer took it up some 20,000 feet, and sent several rockets over the light, which we hoped dropped into the city. A month went by in this way. We were in constant communication by water with the great city, receiving supplies and reinforcements of men and armament. And then gradually the situation changed. Over a period of several days our hand-to-hand encounters with the enemy grew less frequent. Finally 2 or 3 days went by without one of them taking place. We became bolder and prepared to establish several projectors at different points for simultaneous fire at a given signal. The light barrage in the valley remained unchanged, although now its beams held steady instead of sometimes swinging to and fro. We dislodged one of its projectors with a rocket, making a hole in the barrage, which this time was not repaired. And then, to our amazement, the lights one by one began to die away. We ceased operations, waiting. Within half a day they had all vanished, like lights which had flickered and burned out. Mercer, unthinking, was all for an instant attack. We could indeed have swept the valley now without difficulty, but there were thousands of people in the city, non-combatants, women and children, and to murder them to no purpose was not the sort of warfare we cared to make. It seemed probable that Tao had evacuated his position. The valley beyond the city led up into the mountains toward the dark city, almost on the borderland of the frozen wastes of the dark country. Tao had protected this valley from behind so that we had been unable to penetrate it without making a detour of over 20 miles. This I had not done, although had the siege lasted longer, I think with our next reinforcement we should have attempted it. With the extinguishing of the lights, our long-range activities ceased. We anticipated some trick, and for several days remained quiet. Our girls could have flown over the city, but this I would not allow, fearing that a ray would bring them suddenly down. Mila and myself, occupying one of the stone houses down by the river, held a consultation there with Mercer and Anina. Mercer, as usual, was for instant action. We might as well march right in, he declared. They are out of business, or they've gone, one or the other. To the dark city they have gone, I think, Anina said. I think so, too, Mercer agreed. I'll go in alone on foot, I said, and find out what has happened. But Mila shook her head. One who can fly will go more safely. I shall go. Not you, my sister, Anina said quietly. Warfare is not for you, now. That you can understand, can you not? I shall go. Mercer insisted on accompanying her, and he did, part of the way, waiting while she flew close over the city. It was several hours before they returned, reporting that the place was almost in ruins, and that Tao and his men had fled some time before, leaving the light barrage to burn itself out. The next day, with our men in the black cloth suits of armor marching up the valley, and the girls with their black shields flying overhead, we took possession of all that remained of the lone city. Chapter 28. The end of Tao. The scene of desolation that met us in the lone city was at once extraordinary and awesome. It seemed impossible that our rays, acting for so brief a period, could have done so much damage. The city was nothing more than a semi-civilized settlement of little, flat-topped stone houses. Our rays, striking these, had discharged harmlessly into the ground. But the interiors had been penetrated through windows and doors, and everything inflammable about them, as well as about the streets, had been destroyed. The people had taken refuge in cellars underground and in caves and crevices, wherever they could find shelter. But even so, there were 1,000 dead in that city that morning, and rapidly spreading disease would shortly have killed them all. They came out of their hiding places little by little as we entered the streets, and stood about in groups staring at us sullenly. They seemed mostly old men and women and children, the younger men having fled with Tao's army. They were heavy-set, pathetic people, with broad, heavy faces, pasty white skin, and large protruding eyes. We were in the lone city nearly a month, burying the dead, doing what we could for the people, and destroying or removing the apparatus Tao had left behind him. The lone city, before the banishment of Tao, had been one of the most primitive settlements of the Twilight region. It was in the other hemisphere that the Twilight country was more densely populated, but since this lone city was so close to the great city, it had become the scene of Tao's exile. This region about the lone city was of the most barren of the whole Twilight country. Its people were almost entirely meat-eaters. Back toward the dark country great bands of animals like caribou roamed. Living almost entirely in darkness, they had little power of sight, and were easy prey to hunters. Their hides, which were covered with short, white fur, provided clothing, a form of candle was made from their fat, and used for lighting, and their flesh provided food. The dark city, some 250 miles away, was the center from which most of these animals were obtained. Then, that's where Tao has been getting his supplies from, Mercer exclaimed, as we heard all this from one of the Twilight people. And that's where he has gone now. Tao had indeed withdrawn to the dark city, we learned positively. And more than that, we learned that he had factories there as well as here. We found in the lone city some 8 of the interplanetary vehicles, most of them almost entirely completed. The fact that Tao had abandoned them so readily made us believe he had others in the dark city. There seemed a curious lack of appliances for protection against the ray. This we attributed to two causes: that Tao had managed to take most of them with him, and that his supply of fabric came from distant cities on the other side of the globe. Within a month after we had occupied the lone city, we were again ready to start forward. It had been an irksome month for Mercer, and not a day had passed without my receiving a truculent declaration from him that we were fools to allow Tao to escape so easily. Our occupation of the lone city was to continue. On this second expedition farther into the Twilight Country, I took with me a much smaller and more select force. We had before us a land journey of some 250 miles, through an unknown, barren country, in which it would be difficult for us to maintain ourselves, so I was determined to be burdened with as few men as possible. Our force consisted of all the older men trained in the operation of the larger projectors and rockets, a variety of mechanics and helpers, men selected for their physical strength, a corps of young men to the number of 50, and 50 girls. We did not take the platforms, for I assumed it would be too cold for the girls to make sustained flights. Against this cold we provided ourselves well with the white furry garments of the Twilight people. I need not go into details of our march to the Dark City. It occupied some 3 weeks. We met with no opposition, passing a few isolated settlements, whose inhabitants rather welcomed us than otherwise. This region we passed through took us almost to the ill-defined borders of the dark country. It was not mountainous, but rather more a great broken plateau with a steady ascent. Each day it grew darker and colder, until at last we entered perpetual night. It was not the sort of night we know on Earth, but a Stygian blackness. We used little torches now, of the light ray current, and our little army, nudging along in their lurid glare, and dragging its wagons piled high with the projectors, presented a curious and weird picture. The country for the most part was barren rock, with a few stunted trees growing in the ravines and crevices. There was an abundance of water. We encountered several rainstorms, and once during the last week it snowed a little. Except for the storms, the wind held steady, a gentle breeze from the colder regions in front blowing back toward the light country behind us. During the latter days of our journey I noticed a curious change in the ground. It seemed now, in many places, to be like a soft, chalky limestone, which ran in pockets and seams between strata of very hard rock. I called Mila's attention to it once, and she pointed out a number of irregular-shaped, small masses of a substance which in daylight I assumed might be yellow. These were embedded in the soft limestone. "Sulfur," she said. "Like that on your Earth. There is much of it up here, I have heard." The Dark City occupied a flat plateau, slightly elevated above the surrounding country, and on the brink of a sheer drop of some 6,000 or 7,000 feet to an arm of the Polar Sea. Our problems now were very different from when we had laid siege to the lone city. The conformation of the country allowed us no opportunity to approach closer than 2 or 3 miles to the barrage of light we must expect. We could not reach the city from these nearest points with our projectors. There were many lateral ravines depressed below the upper surface of the main plateau, and though the light rays from the city, directed horizontally, would sweep their tops, we found we could traverse many of them a considerable distance in safety. But from the bottoms of them we could only fire our rockets without specific aim and our projectors not at all. Only by the most fortuitous of circumstances did we escape complete annihilation the first moment we appeared within range. We had no idea what lay ahead, although the guides we had brought with us from the lone city informed us we were nearing our destination, and the scene remained in complete darkness until we were hardly more than 5 miles outside Tao's stronghold. Then, without warning, his lights flashed on, not only a vertical bainage, but a horizontal one as well, sweeping the higher points of the entire country around for a distance of 12 or 15 miles. We were, at the moment, following the bottom of a narrow gully. Had we been on any of the upper reaches of the plateau we would undoubtedly have been picked out by one of the roving beams of light and destroyed. We camped where we were, and again for several days I attempted nothing, devoting myself to a thorough exploration of the country about us. The dark city appeared impregnable. Beams of light from Dow's larger projectors were constantly roaming about the entire plateau that surrounded it, and every higher point of vantage from which one of ours could have reached them must have been struck by their rays a score of times a day. It will be understood, of course, that any place where we could mount one of the higher-powered projectors, a task of several hours at best, and strike the city, must of necessity be also within range of their rays, for theirs were as powerful as ours. Upon observation I felt convinced that should we attempt to mount a projector anywhere on these higher points it would be sought out and destroyed long before we could bring it into action. That this was Dow's stronghold, and not the lone city, now became evident. I could readily understand why he had retreated here. Fully 4 times as many projectors as he had in operation in the lone city were now in evidence. Those of shorter range, and spreading rays, kept the entire country bathed in steady light for several miles around him, while the larger ones, 100 of them possibly, roved constantly over the black emptiness beyond. From our encampment we could advance but little farther. Fortunately, retreat was open to us, and once beyond the circle of steady light, we had no difficulty in moving about in the darkness, even though momentarily we frequently were within range of the single light beams, had they chanced to swing upon us. This was the situation which, even Mercer agreed, appeared hopeless. We explored the brink of the precipice below which lay the sea. It was a sheer drop of many thousand feet. Although a descent might have been made closer to the dark city, certainly it was not possible at any point we could reach. We sent our girls down, and they reported that from below it appeared probable that access to the ocean was had by the dark city some miles farther along. They went but a short distance, for Dow's lights were occasionally sweeping about, and more than that, they could make but very short flights, owing to the cold. To starve Dow out appeared equally as impractical as a direct attack. With our little army we could not surround the city on a circumference of some 80 miles. We might, indeed, have barred the several roads that entered it, but it seemed probable that if Dow wanted to come out he would come, for all we could do to stop him. And yet to starve him out seemed our only possible plan. "We'll have to send back for reinforcements," I told Mercer, Mila and Anina at one of our many conferences. "An army of several thousand, if we can maintain it up here." And then, the very next day, Mercer and Alina came forward with their discovery. We had set up our encampment of little black fabric tents in a ravine some 6 miles outside the city, securely hidden by surrounding cliffs. Above us across the black sky the greenish-red beams of Dow's light rays swept continually to and fro. Mila and I were sitting together disconsolately in our tent, reviewing the situation, when Mercer and Anina burst in. They had been roaming about together, exploring the country, and came in now full of excitement and enthusiasm to tell us what they had found. We too were to accompany them. They would tell us no more than that, and as soon as we had all eaten we started off. It would be a trip of several hours, Mercer said, and would take us around to the other side and partly behind the dark city. We followed no road, but scrambled along over the open country, picking our way as best we could, and using the lights from the city to give us direction. The 2 girls half walked, half flew, and Mercer and Elle, with our ability to take huge leaps, made rapid progress. The night was black, that unluminous blackness that seems to swallow everything, even objects near at hand. We made our way along, using little hand searchlights that threw a red glare a short distance before us. We kept down in the gullies as much as possible, avoiding the higher places where Dow's long-range beams were constantly striking, and passed around in front of the dark city, keeping always at least 5 miles away. We had been traveling 2 or 3 hours, and still Mercer and Alina gave us no clue to what we were about to see. It began to snow. Huge, soft flakes soon lay thick on the ground. "Mercer, where are you taking us?" I exclaimed once. You shall see very soon now, Alina answered me. What we have found, Ollie and I, and our plan, you shall understand it soon. We had to be content with that. An hour later we found ourselves well around behind the dark city and hardly more than 4 miles outside it. A great jagged cliff face, 200 feet high perhaps, fronted us. We, at its base, were on comparatively low ground here, with another low line of cliffs shading us from the light beams of the city. Mercer and Anina stopped and pointed upward at the cliff. A huge seam of the soft, chalky limestone ran laterally for 500 feet or more across its face. I saw embedded in this seam great irregular masses of sulphur. There you are, said Mercer triumphantly. Sulphur, stacks of it. All we have to do is set fire to it. With the wind blowing this way, right toward the city, his gesture was significant. The feasibility of the plan struck us at once. It was an enormous deposit of free sulphur. From this point the prevailing wind blew directly across the city. The sulphur lay in great masses sufficiently close together so that if we were to set fire to it in several places with our small light ray torches we could be assured of its burning steadily. And its fumes, without warning, blowing directly over the city, I shuddered as the whole thing became clear to me. Good God, man, that'll smoke 'em out, declared Mercer, waving his hand again toward the cliff. I'll ask you now, won't that smoke 'em out? Dow's men, yes. Mila's face was grave as she answered Mercer's triumphant question. It will do that, Ollie. Kill them all, of a certainty, but that whole city there. Mercer stared at his feet, toying idly with the little torch in his hand. Can you think of any other way to get at Dow? He asked. Alina met my eyes steadily. There is no other way, she said quietly. It must be done. It is your world, your people, we must think of now. And you know there is no other way. We decided at last to try it. Once we had made the decision, we proceeded as quickly as possible to put the plan into execution. We moved our encampment farther away, well out of danger from the fumes. We mounted several of the projectors in positions where their rays could reach the surrounding country, and the sky, although not the city itself. Then, ordering our men and girls to hold themselves in readiness for whatever might occur, we 4 went off together to fire the sulphur. The wind was blowing directly toward the city as we stood at the base of the cliff, a silent little group. I think that now, at this moment, we all of us hesitated in awe at what we were about to do. Mercer broke the tension. Come on, Alan, let's start it off. Now is the time, a lot of places at once. We flashed on our little light rays, and in a moment the sulphur was on fire at a score of different points. We drew off a few hundred feet to one side and sat down to watch it in the darkness. Overhead Dow's red beams swept like giant searchlights across the inky sky. The sulphur started burning with tiny little spots of wavering blue flame that seemed, many of them, about to die away. Gradually they grew larger, spreading out slowly and silently in ever-widening circles. Under the heat of the flames the sulphur masses became molten, turned into a viscous dark red fluid that boiled and bubbled heavily and dropped spluttering upon the ground. Slowly the blue-green flames spread about, joining each other and making more rapid headway, a dozen tiny volcanoes vomiting their deadly fumes and pouring forth their sluggish, boiling lava. The scene about us now was lighted in a horrible blue-green glare. A great cloud of thin smoke gathered, hung poised a moment, and then rolled slowly away, its deadly fumes hanging low to the ground and spreading ever wider as though eager to clutch the unsuspecting city in their deadly embrace. The entire face of the cliff was now covered with the crawling blue fire, lapping avidly about with its 10-foot tongues. We drew back, staring silently at each other's ghastly green faces. Let's get away," Mercer whispered finally. "No use staying here now." We hurried back to the nearest place where one of our projectors was set up. The two men guarding it looked at us anxiously, and smiled triumphantly when Mila told them what we had done. We stood beside them a moment, then Mila and I climbed to an eminence nearby from which we had an unobstructed view of the city. The light barrage still held steady. The individual, higher-powered projectors as before swung their beams lazily about the country. We sat partly in the shelter of a huge boulder, behind which we could have dropped quickly had one of them turned our way. "Soon it will be there," Mila said softly, when we had been sitting quiet for a time. I did not answer. It was indeed too solemn a thing for words, this watching from the darkness while an invisible death, let loose by our own hands, stole down upon our complacent enemies. A few moments more we watched, and still the scene before us showed no change. Then, absently, the lights seemed to waver, some of the beams swung hurriedly to and fro, then remained motionless in unusual positions, as though the men at their levers in sudden panic had abandoned them. My heart was beating violently. What hidden tragedy was being enacted behind that silent barrier of light? I shuddered as my imagination conjured up hideous pictures of that unseen death that now must be stalking about those city streets, entering those homes, polluting the air with its stifling, noisome breath, and that even at this distance seemed clutching at my own lungs. I suppose the whole thing did last only a moment. There was little in what we saw of significance had we not known. But we did know, and the knowledge left us trembling and unnerved. I leaped to my feet, pulling Mila after me, and in a few moments more we were back beside the projector we had left with Mercer and Alina. Suddenly a white shape appeared in the sky over the city. It passed perilously close above the shattered light barrage and came sailing out in our direction. Mercer jumped for the projector, but I was nearer, and in a moment I had flashed it on. "It's Tao!" Mercer shouted. It was one of Tao's interplanetary vehicles, rising slowly in a great arc above us. I swung our light beams upward, it swept across the sky and fell upon the white shape. The thing seemed to poise in its flight, as though held by the little red circle of light that fastened upon it, boring its way in. Then, slowly at first, it fell, faster and faster it dropped, until it struck the ground with a great crash, the first and only sound of all this soundless warfare. It was 3 days before the great sulfur deposit we had ignited burned itself out. The lights of the city had all died away, and blackness such as I never hoped to experience again settled down upon the scene. We approached the dark city then, we even entered one or two of its outlying houses, but beyond that we did not go, for we had made certain of what we wanted to know. I remember my father once describing how, when a young man, he had gone to the little island of Martinique shortly after the great volcanic outbreak of Mount Pelee. I remember his reluctance to dwell upon the scenes he saw there in that silent city of Saint-Pierre, the houses with their dead occupants, stricken as they were sitting about the family table, the motionless forms in the streets, lying huddled where death had overtaken them in their sudden panic. That same reluctance silences me now, for one does not voluntarily dwell upon such scenes as those. A day or so later we found the interplanetary projectile which had sought to escape. Amid its wreckage lay the single, broken form of Tao, that leader who, plotting the devastation of 2 worlds for his own personal gain, had at the very last deserted his comrades and met his death alone. Chapter 29. The Return. There is but little more to add. With the death of Tao and the changing of the law concerning the Virgin's wings, my mission on Mercury was over. But I did not think of that then, for with the war ended, my position as virtual ruler of the Light Country still held Mercer and me occupied with a multiplicity of details. It was a month or more after our return from the Twilight Country that Mila reminded me of father and my duty to him. "You have forgotten, my husband." "But I have not. Your world, it calls you now. You must go back. Go back home, to father and dear little Beth." I had not realized how much I had wanted it. "What you have done for our nation, for our girls, can never be repaid, Alan. And you can do more in later years, perhaps. But now your father needs you, and we must think of him. I cast aside every consideration of what changes would first have to be made here on Mercury, and decided in that moment to go. But you must go with me, Mila, I said, and then, as I thought of something else, I added gently, you will, won't you, little wife? For you know I cannot leave you now. She smiled her tender little smile. Whither thou goest, I will go, my husband, she quoted softly, for thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. We were ready to start at the time of the next inferior conjunction of Mercury with the Earth. At our combined pleading, and with the permission of his associates, Fuuro was persuaded to take command of the nation during my absence, and I felt I was leaving affairs in able hands. Lua refused to accompany us, but she urged Anina to go, and the little girl was ready enough to take advantage of her mother's permission. Though he said nothing, I shall never forget Mercer's face as this decision was made. The vehicle in which Mila had made her former trip was still lying in the valley where we had left it. We went away privately, only Lua and Fuuro accompanying us out of the city. Lua parted with her two daughters quietly. Her emotions at seeing them go she concealed under that sweet, gentle reserve which was characteristic of her always. Promise me you will be careful of her, Alan, she said softly as she kissed me at parting. We landed in the Chilean Andes, with that patient statue of the Christ to welcome us back to Earth. The Trans-Andean Railroad runs near it, and we soon were in the city of Buenos Aires. The two girls, with wings shrouded in their long cloaks, walked about its crowded streets with a wonderment I can only vaguely imagine. We had only what little money I had taken with me to Mercury. I interviewed a prominent banker of the city, told him in confidence who I was, and from him obtained necessary funds. We cabled father then, and he answered at once that he would come down and join us. We waited for him down there, and in another month he was with us, dear old gentleman, leaning over the steamer rail, trying to hold back the tears of joy that sprang into his eyes at sight of me. Little Beth was with him, too, smart and stylish as ever, and good old Bob Trevor, whom she shyly presented as her husband. The beach at March del Plata, near Buenos Aires, is one of the most beautiful spots in South America, and on a clear moonlit night, with the Southern Cross overhead, it displays the starry heavens as few other places can on this earth. On such a night in February 1942, Mercer and Anina sat together on the sand, apart from the gay throng that crowded the pavilion below them. The girl was dressed all in white, with a long black cape covering her wings. Her beautiful blonde hair was piled on her head in huge soft coils, and over it she had thrown a filmy, sky-blue mantilla that shone with a soft luster in the moonlight and seemed reflected in the blue of her eyes. Mercer in white flannels sat beside her, cross-legged on the white sand, with a newly purchased Hawaiian guitar across his lap. From the bandstand in the pavilion down the beach faint strains of music floated up to them. The moon silvered the water before them, a soft, gentle breeze of summer caressed their cheeks, the myriad stars glittered overhead like brilliant gems scattered on the turquoise velvet of the sky. Alina, chin cupped in her hand, sat staring at the wonderful heavens that all her life before had been withheld from her sight. She sighed tremulously. "Want to say this is a night," Mercer declared, breaking a long silence. It's beautiful," she answered softly. "Those millions of worlds, like mine, perhaps, or like this one of yours." She turned to him. "Ollie, which of them is my world?" "You can't see it now, Anina. It's too close to the sun." Again she sighed. "I'm sorry for that. It would seem closer, perhaps, if we could see it." "You're not sorry you came, Anina? You don't want to go back now?" "Not now, Ollie." She smiled into his earnest, pleading eyes. "For those I love are here as well as there. I have Mila and Aunt." Mercer leaned forward eagerly. "And Mila's little son, that darling little baby. We must go back soon and see Mila. She will be wondering where we are." Mercer sat back. he said. Yes, we must. The band in the pavilion stopped its music. Mercer slid his little steel crosspiece over the guitar strings and began to play the haunting, crying music of the islands, the music of moonlight and love. After a moment he stopped abruptly. Anina, that little song you sang in the boat that day, you remember, the day we went to the water city? Sing it again, Alina. She sang it through softly, just as she had in the boat, to its last ending little half-sob. Mercer laid his guitar on the sand beside him. You said that music talks to you, Alina, though sometimes you don't understand just what it tries to say. I feel it that way, too, only tonight, now, I think I do understand. His voice was very soft and earnest and just a trifle husky. You said that it was a love song, Anina, and it was sad because love is sad. Do you think love is always sad? He put out his hand awkwardly and touched hers. Do you, Anina, he whispered. Her little figure swayed toward him. She half turned, and in her shining eyes he saw the light that needs no words to make its meaning clear. The timidity that so often before had restrained him was swept away. He took her abruptly into his arms, kissing her hair, her eyes, her lips. Love isn't always very sad, is it, Anina? Her arms held him close. I don't know, she breathed against his shoulder. But it's very wonderful. The end.